This program deals with themes of an adult nature and is intended for a mature audience.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
We must guard against the military-industrial complex.
Exopolitics, paranormal phenomena, and deep analysis of current world events. From somewhere in the desert, between Area 51 and Roswell, blasting across the planet, the Manticore Network proudly presents Veritas, because the truth will set you free.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
The power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty!
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Sooner or later, though, you always have to wake up.
Be skeptical, but don't close your mind.
Greetings to everyone around the world, and a warm welcome to another edition of Veritas, where we uncover the truth, one guest at a time. For those who dare to seek, Veritas is the place where they shall find. I'm your host, Mel Fabregas, and I sincerely thank you for joining me once again. And if this is your first time, make yourself at home. I want to thank all our members. As always, you are keeping Veritas alive. Tonight's special guest is someone who works very close with Cliff High. Together, they create great synergy. From urbansurvival.com, we welcome for the first time on Veritas, George Ure, who will talk exactly about that, urban survival, during these dire times. George will be with us shortly. To listen to the complete version of this and all our past and future shows, become a member. You will receive immediate access to all our inventory of shows, that's 85 to date, and a few bonus interviews, the Manticore Forum, and the Veritas chat room. Just head on over to our website, veritasshow.com, click on subscribe, and take Veritas with you. And remember the metal-cased 8GB USB drive containing all of Season 1 in CD audio quality and a few bonuses for you is now for sale. For more information, visit the Veritas store.
Killing at least 49 soldiers. Thanks to surgery at the hospital procedure.
And news about the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster don't stop coming. I will be conducting another interview with James Fox very soon. But today, I get an email from James. If you continue to say that the suspension of the First Amendment rights is an exaggeration, even the mainstream media now reports this. BP and the administration replace First Amendment with $40,000 fine and a Class D felony to anyone who comes close to less than 65 feet away from vessels or personnel over water or inland. And the press is not exempt either, so freedom of speech and freedom of the press have been suspended. And this is what James Fox reported today. Quote, I spent all day waiting for a dumpster full of tar balls and oil to be picked up. Just as the sun was setting, the truck arrived. We followed and found where the toxic sludge was being taken, only to be contained and questioned by the police. Police guarding a waste management site? He told me to turn off the camera and took my ID and told me to leave and not come back. I'll post video soon. Weird stuff going on, unquote. Definitely weird stuff going on. So stay tuned for another revealing interview with James Fox coming soon. He also has information of lab results of water and some of this oil. It's not good, but we have to tell you. And I'm sure many of you want to know how my trip to the ECETI conference at James Gilliland's ranch went. And although I can only summarize due to time limitations, let me start by saying it was fantastic. I left 110-degree weather in the desert to overlook Mount Adams full of snow. The setting, the scenery, is absolutely stunning. The drive from Portland, Oregon to Trout Lake, Washington is just beautiful. And it's what you can expect in a movie. There were over 300 people there, all in the same wavelength of positive intent, love, and compassion for one another. No wonder it's hard to leave that place. And the lineup of guests, the speakers, was as great as you can expect. I arrived there on Thursday and got acquainted with the ranch. On Thursday, there were speakers throughout the day. At night, it was Skywatch time. It was overcast the first night, the beginning of the evening. People were using infrared goggles and cameras, and we were all watching all sorts of things flying around. I sat down on my chair and started wishing to see something unquestionable, something that I could see with my naked eye and that I could say for the first time I saw a UFO. Not even a few minutes after that thought, in the distance, I saw a bright object approaching. It was definitely not an airplane. It slowed down as it was flying over us, then it powered up and got even brighter, almost as if saying, we can see you, now you can see us. I had my camera with me, the video camera, but I was so mesmerized with my first UFO sighting that I decided to just enjoy the moment without even blinking. I feared that if I turned on the camera, I would miss the rest. Luckily, next to me was one of the speakers filming. His name is John Kelly from Canada. He's an expert on reverse speech. He filmed it with his professional equipment, and I will give him a witness statement for his website, and he will give us a copy of that video so I can show it to you soon. Remember, I have seen questionable objects in the past, but since I cannot prove them, I won't admit them. But here, I can conclusively say, this was it. It almost felt like a personal graduation after so many decades researching the subject. Was I impressed? Yes, but not the way most of you would think. Why? Because deep inside, I knew they existed. This was simply personal confirmation. Apparently, another big ship was seen the day after, and James Gilliland filmed it. I will ask for a copy so I can show you too. Apparently, that one was huge also and changed colors. At any rate, on Saturday, James Gilliland asked me if I could be present during his broadcast of his radio show called As You Wish. I was there with all of the speakers and filmed the entire broadcast. I will make the audio and video available to you in the next few days. Many of the speakers you have already seen, but there are two who will be with us shortly, and they are outstanding. One of them is Mary Rodwell, and the other one is Lisa Renee. You will be blown away with these two ladies. How privileged was I to be surrounded by all of them and participating on James' show as well. My good friend Paula Harris, and she seems to always do this, and I thank her. She did this at the International UFO Congress, where she allowed me to introduce myself to close to 1,000 people. And now she did the same at the ECETI Ranch. She asked me to come to the stage so I could introduce myself to the audience at the ranch. And that was very nice of you, Paula, once again. So whatever I can do to help you, please just let me know. Then on Sunday evening, I was invited to sit down with Dr. Brooks Agnew, where we recorded a very important oil spill interview that many of you have already heard. It's already making it around the world, and feedback is already pouring in. One person said, quote, "This is by far one of the most logically connected, fact-based interviews I have heard to date. The sources are not anonymous, and the facts are verifiable," unquote. So this week, you are getting the equivalent of 2 shows. Dr. Agnew's interview was not available for download until today. You can see it next to this show. I also recorded this interview on video and will make it available shortly. In addition to the video equipment, I have brought new audio recording equipment. However, I should have read the instructions, and it failed a bit. Nonetheless, I was able to patch audio from the videotapes, and the interview came out very well. After the batteries were depleted, we decided to stay with Dr. Agnew to talk about many other subjects. We stayed there for hours, and I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. And last, but certainly not least, I wish I could name them all, but it would take a long time. Weeks before the event, many of you wrote to me saying you were going to be there. However, I had absolutely no idea there were going to be so many of you. I was glad I had a chance to chat with all of you. I have met a few of you before, but I met many more this time. And let me tell you, it was a highlight, a real pleasure, and an honor for me. I wish I could have spent more time with you, but these schedules were tight. We'll do this again. And even James' staff thanked me for bringing so many people. So I am the one thanking you for being there and for allowing me to spend some time with you. You have no idea how much this meant to me. I want to thank James Gilliland for having the vision to connect and help wake so many people up. This is definitely disclosure. We don't need the government to disclose for us. You are making it happen, James, and this is testimonial. You know me by now. I don't want to believe. I want to know. And like James Fox says, I know what I saw. It was Dr. Brooks Agnew's testimonial during our show, which I replayed during James Gilliland's show with me, that really convinced me to go. And then many of you wrote to me and compelled me. So I'm glad we got it done. I look forward to hopefully being there next year with all of you. And speaking of UFO sightings, I was going to refer you to the forum for the following, but I thought it was important enough to share it with you here. Thanks to Ryan, one of our listeners who contacted me via Facebook this evening to share the following that comes directly from the China Daily newspaper. The title reads, "Flights Diverted, Delayed as UFO Detected Hovering." An unidentified flying object disrupted air traffic over Zhejiang provincial capital, Hangzhou, late on Wednesday, the municipal government said on Thursday. Xianshan Airport was closed after the UFO was detected at around 9 p.m., and some flights were rerouted to airports in the cities of Ningbo and Wuxi, said an airport spokesman who declined to be named. The airport had resumed operations, and more details will be released after an investigation, he said. A source with knowledge of the matter, however, told China Daily on Thursday that authorities had learned what the UFO was after an investigation. But it was not the proper time to publicly disclose the information because there was a military connection, he said, adding that an official explanation is expected to be given on Friday. Inbound flights were diverted to the nearby airport in Zhejiang province Ningbo and Jiangsu province Wuxi. Outbound flights were delayed for 3 to 4 hours. A staff member at the airport's information desk said the airport had no idea how many flights were affected by the closure. At around 11 p.m. on Wednesday, a netizen wrote 3 entries announcing the airport's closure in his microblog at Sina.com. They were all soon deleted. He posted an apology at midnight, saying the news had not been confirmed and asking those who had republished his earlier entries to delete them. Very interesting. I will continue following this story. I have also included a picture on this UFO at our forum. What a picture. Like I always say, my interaction with you does not end with the show. It only begins. Visit the forum and my Facebook page for updates and news. And now, get ready. Times are dire, and the future belongs to those who prepare. Urban survival is the main topic tonight. The Gulf of Mexico oil disaster and guidance for those affected. What does the economy have in place for us? What if war with Iran begins? George Ure from urbansurvival.com. We'll discuss these and much more. If you want to believe the mainstream media, stop this audio now. If you want to know how to prepare, don't go anywhere. This is Mel Fabregas, and you're listening to Veritas. Most of the great music you hear right here on the Veritas Show is supplied by the independent artists from Jamendo.com. If you hear a song you like, go over to our homepage, veritasshow.com, click on the guest, look up the song, and download it. You can even buy the group's CDs, in many cases right there at Jamendo.com.
This is Cliff High from urbansurvival.com, and you're listening to The Veritas Show.
George Ure has been a Renaissance man type since he left the corporate world in 2002, after stints as a big city news director, vice president of an international airline, battery, state-of-charge instrumentation marketing guru, and software strategic planner. In addition to an MBA, George is equally comfortable on a tractor, doing plumbing and wiring, flying airplanes, and writing about his long-term time love, something called long-wave economics. To say his outlook on the next few years is grim understates the short-term outlook for bad, and worse. But he shares with others, like Dr. Jack Lessinger's work, the outlook for a much better world sometime after 2020, when, quote-unquote, responsible capitalism arrives and the end of Little King capitalism. Me, damn it. It's all about me. Capitalism dies off from the weight of its own compounding sins. His website, urbansurvival.com, provides daily business news, analysis, and financial market coverage from the long-wave economic perspective. Since 1996, the site has expressed the view that traditional content expansion corporate business models would all collapse someday and that we'd eventually be forced to move toward green, sustainable business models, the new economics of responsible capitalism, or perish. Hello, George, and thank you for being on Veritas. How are you?
It is my pleasure to be here, Mel. I'm great.
It's my pleasure. And let me just say that on this interview, I'm going to have to be on my feet. Because although George seriously looks at the overall financial picture and more, he has a terrific sense of humor that catches me off guard every so often. So I need to be prepared. George, many people who listen to this show know who you are, but there are others around the world who may not. So aside from the bio that I just read, tell us more about yourself and what changed you to the point that it caused the creation of urban survival, peoplenomics, and all those great things you're doing these days.
Well, it's an interesting story, Mel. I guess it really began with the typical midlife crisis. I was a very successful big city news director in Seattle. I enjoyed doing the news and chasing down the big name people to do the interviews, riding around on corporate jets and flying here and there to cover everything from the North Slope pipeline development to mass murders to airline crashes, every politician of just about any stripe, including a couple of presidents. After you get at that level of having access and entree, you sit back and you begin to say, what's the point here? Where is all this going? And about the time I started a family and raised the family up and so forth, I was, typically ensconced in suburbia, living happily ever after. but it wouldn't do anything for me. It wasn't getting me to the kind of place I really wanted to go. So I became single in the late 80s, bought a large 40-foot offshore sailboat, lived on a sailboat for 10 years, had the kids over every weekend, or almost every weekend, taught the kids sailing and spent a lot of time doing just that, sailing Puget Sound and going up, inside islands, British Columbia, east side of Vancouver Island. And later on, I'd sail, after 2001, sailed all the way south as far as San Diego. During that time, a lot of things clicked for me. I had left the news-chasing business, and I had gotten into management, both of a small regional jet airline down in the Caribbean, as well as doing some breakthrough work with a company that went on to become Avaya, which was taken private here a number of years ago, but at its peak it was something like $7 billion worth on the New York Stock Exchange. And to be around a company like that when there's all of 13 employees gives you a tremendous sense of empowerment. I can do this, I can do anything, kind of thinking. And so one thing led to another, and I started researching economics, went back to school, picked up a bachelor's in business administration, then said, hey, this is really fun stuff, went on to do my master's. And it's about that time that I became very interested, and I'm not really sure why, but I noticed that the economy, going back all the way to the 1200s, went through definite cycles, roughly 50 years. And this was all based in part on the work of Nicholas Kondratiev, who was a Russian economist in about 1926 or so, who had told Joseph Stalin that basically, I got good news for you and bad news for you. The good news from the then Soviet perspective was that the West was going to have a terrible economic depression, and all kinds of people would be laid off. There'd be huge human suffering, and a lot of people in the U.S. would be calling for socialist government. The bad news, though, which caused Stalin to send Nicholas Kondratiev off to the gulags in Siberia, was basically, he said, unfortunately, the West will make a dramatic comeback and be stronger than ever and will oppose the Soviet system, which all came to pass, of course, through 1989 when the Soviet system imploded on itself because of all of the bureaucratic excess and overhead, or some would argue just a change of tactics. So that's really where my background is. It's in following the longer waves of history, and using my 13 years of interviewing meaningful thought leaders, everybody from Louis L'Amour, the Western writer, to folks like Dr. Paul Erdman, who wrote The Crash of '79, The Silver Bears, and things like that. It got me really interested in history and really interested in economics. And it's exciting as the dickens today to be able to talk with current-day thought leaders in that whole area of study. In fact, I was just reading a book today about the really bright times that are ahead for America when we transition from the me economy that we're in right now into the us economy, which will be bringing the next spurt of growth along around 2020 or so. Unfortunately, history, and this really gets to the heart of a University of Washington professor emeritus of business, Dr. Jack Lessinger's works. Jack observes that, and you can find his books on Amazon, by the way. He observes that we go through these socioeconomic extremes for 25 to 35, maybe even 40 years, will be in an economy that's all me. And we're just coming out of that now. After that, we go into an economy that's us. The problem is that the transition from the two states is often fraught with depression. You don't get a smooth transition from one mindset to another. And unfortunately, that's really where we are right now. We're seeing the end of the me economy. And along in its place will be the what's good for us, what's good for the planet kind of economy. The difference being, of course, that the colossus of industry may be very good at turning on production and very good at making money, but it doesn't do really a lot for families and personal achievement and satisfaction, things like that. So those are the extremes. You either get a lot of spiritual satisfaction or you get a lot of economic satisfaction. And as the economy goes in cycles, we waffle back and forth between the two, which is why we're having a manic time on Wall Street right now. We're in a major bear market that began July of 2007 when the market was up around 14,000 or so. It dropped down to 6,100 or 60. What was it, Mel? You remember that 66.27? That was it.
Right.
In March of 2009, and we've had a great big bounce, and everybody's going, "Oh boy, we're out of the woods." Well, no. We actually face the prospect later on this year or sometime next year. The statistical possibility is that we could see the markets collapse into long periods of inactivity and illiquidity, which is why I have various, what I'm willing to share with people is I don't mind sharing any aspect of what I'm investing in, and not saying that it's right for everyone. It just happens to be right for me, and I don't mind talking about it, and I'm not selling anything.
And that's what I want. I want this show to be a barometer to the average person who's out there. And I wasn't too creative this time around. I usually give a nice title to a show. And although I gave a nice title, it's Urban Survival, just like the name of your website, because it's very important to do that these days. But have we reached the precipice like 1929, or are we there but have been putting some makeup, if you will, with the bailouts and the funny money that's surrounding us all the time now?
Well, there's a couple of points. The first one is there is some recent work that has started showing up in non-quantitative economics that suggests that the depression period that countries go through as they transition from me to us kind of economies is really a perhaps decade or even longer than a decade event. Lessinger points this out in his work, but others are starting to also notice that the U.S. Depression did not really begin in 1929, September 3rd, when the market hit 381.9 or something like that. Really, the Depression of the 1930s had its grassroots in the market break of 1921-22. And so we can almost look at that as parallel to the market break that took place in the United States when the Internet bubble collapsed, or at least started to collapse.
Late 90s.
Yeah, late 90s, or technically, I guess, from the spring of 2000 is when it really got underway. And most people didn't realize it was the onset of an economic depression, even at that point, because everything was investus interruptus with September of 2001 and the Twin Towers episode. There are some of a conspiratorial bent who might argue that that's a little too convenient, that timing, to see the market on the verge of recognizing that we're starting a Great Depression. And what happened was the Operation Iraqi Freedom and so on and so forth, the combined wheeling out of terrorism as a global agenda for the United States in many ways served the same economic function that the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps served when the first Depression got rolling up in 1932-33. There are many differences, and some of them are really interesting when you go into them. I could probably bore you with some statistics about bank closures, but we've had as many branches have closed down now due to banking consolidations and takeovers. We've had as much turnover in the banking sector almost as we had in like the first year of the Great Depression from 1929 to about 1930, mid-30, maybe even 31. The difference is that we've got some soft landing stuff built in, which was enacted following the original Depression, or the Big Depression of the 1930s. When a bank failed in 1929 and 1930, as many did, the immediate impact on each average person in America was on the order of, in constant dollars, about $463. Today we have a higher cost, maybe $620 per person in the country, but that cost is spread out over time, and we don't have the big hit to economic confidence as a result of the failing banking system. So whereas in 1931, if your bank down the street failed, you were simply SOL, sorry, out of luck, or however else you want to take that one. And what would happen is you'd get suddenly destitute and unable to meet your mortgage payment. Nowadays, we've not only got FDIC and other banks being shotgun married off to keep banks from causing personal economic hardship and rather spreading it out over the whole of society. A good thing, by the way, and regardless of your politics, it has actually prevented us from falling into a much faster economic depression. And the thinking is, and you can see it in policy actions, that if we can spread the pain out over a long enough period of time, we won't have to go down into that really ugly 25-30% kind of unemployment that we had in many parts of the country during the First Depression. Unfortunately, we're already there in places like Detroit, some of the cities in California. I'm sure you're aware that something like
Nevada.
Yeah, Nevada, I was going to say, about 65% of the homes in Nevada right now are upside down. And those are scary numbers, Mel. So, sometimes I wake up in the morning at 4:30 when I come out to my office here and start writing, and I think to myself, do I want to get up and write today? And the answer isn't I want to get up and write because I have anything particularly ingenious or burning to say, but it's almost like going to a NASCAR race. You go because it's so amazing to watch the thing circle in on itself with the occasional wreck. And I mean, that's why people go to stock car races, right? To watch the wrecks. They don't go for, safe driving and how to turn left lessons. They go because of the, right. They do. I mean, they just call it what it is. People have this sense of the macabre or
morbid.
Morbidity. That's it. Well, I guess I have this financial sense of morbidity, but I'm also a contrarian. And a contrarian is somebody who looks at these terrible things going on in the economy and goes, oh boy, how can I make money at this? And it's easy. I mean, it's really, really easy to make money in a bear market. There are funds out there, tracking funds, like I'm particularly fond of the financial sector tracking funds. There's one that's a triple bear fund. In other words, if the financial sector goes down 3%, the triple bear fund will increase in value 9%.
9%. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's tremendous leverage. And so if somebody's willing to play the leverage game, I mean, it can be incredibly profitable. Now, my personal account is only up something like 25% for the year. But
let me ask you, let me interrupt you for 1 second, George. Sure. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm thinking about the shorting and those types of funds. Doesn't this magnify sometimes if we're going down, if the economy is getting worse and worse, and you add all the people who are shorting, doesn't that magnify the situation somewhat?
I don't think so, any more than you could argue that people who were investing for the long term were blowing up the bubble. I mean, yeah, I suppose you might be able to argue that. On the other hand, I look at the small number of dollars that I have invested in the market, and I compare that to the number that these high-frequency trader outfits. You know, when you go make a trade, like I trade with an online stockbroker. The online stockbrokers, most of them, between you and the real free market, are front-running your trades by a few milliseconds using high-frequency trading analytics. In other words, when I push the buy 400 shares of FAZ or whatever I happen to be buying in a particular day, there's a roughly 100 millisecond maybe delay while my order is matched up with other orders inside the firm, and if it looks like it's going to tick up, then these high-frequency algorithms kick in. So they only make maybe a fraction of a cent per share, but they do it day in, day out, trade after trade after trade. And I don't think that short selling, and this was something that came up in the 30s too. I mean, people said, "Oh, it's all because of the bears, the short sellers." No, the short sellers are the other side of the trade. They're simply people that look at the economy and have a different belief set than the ebullient bulls. I mean, somebody who looks at this economy and thinks that, gosh, everything is fine, we're in green shoots, why everything's recovering. I wrote a piece that'll be on my urbansurvival.com site tomorrow morning, this afternoon, when the Federal Reserve came out with its consumer debt number. And maybe a few words about that is in order. The Federal Reserve, which basically rents our money to us in a sense, they come out with something called the Consumer Credit Report once a month, and it shows whether consumers are borrowing more or less than the previous month. And in the numbers out today, the Federal Reserve reports that the rate
revolving is down.
I'm sorry?
I'm saying revolving debt is down.
Yeah, revolving debt is going down, and what that means is that the economy continues to auger in. But even though the consumer debt number is shrinking, which might be in some ways a good thing, it's really very bad for business. And so am I a bad guy for being a bear and saying, people aren't buying as much stuff, which means that company earnings will necessarily be coming down, and when earnings come down, doesn't that drive down the price of these companies? Now, George didn't drive down the price of the companies. What drove down the price of the companies is, hundreds of thousands of people losing their homes, and we've had 10 million jobs. Maybe 8 million are gone permanently, according to some recent reports, that'll never come back to America. We've allowed outsourcing to basically eat our guts out. And so am I a bad guy for recognizing that and bidding prices accordingly, or am I a genius? I mean, if I make money, arguably I'm a bad guy because I'm making money on the market going down. But on the other side, I'm a realist because not only is consumer credit down 4.5%, but what most people don't realize is that M1, the amount of currency in circulation measured by the Fed's H6 report, which is the money stock report, there's actually 7% more money in circulation now than there was a year ago. 7% more now than there was a year ago. So the purchasing power of your money has been watered down 7%, and still we have things looking terrible. So I mean, it's not a pretty picture, Mel, and it's perfectly okay to make money on the market going down. Is it moral and ethical for people to go around and buy up discounted real estate and turn it into rentals? Yeah, I suppose. I mean, if you can get a deal on real estate, I think it's early. I think we've got 2 more years and another further 50% decline downward to come in real estate. But, it's crazy. Yeah, I mean, it's nuts. And I don't think we're anywhere near the end of it yet. The reason we're not near the end of it yet is the Fed has not got the one thing that the Obama administration has not really been able to gin up is a good jobs program. We had a lot of talk about stimulus. We've tried to save some jobs at Chrysler. We've tried to save some jobs at GM. Ford was able to save itself, but that hasn't really fundamentally changed the underlying construct. The underlying construct is, in order for consumer confidence to return, people have to have a clear vision of the future. We have to have infrastructure that we can grow into seamlessly and painlessly, and we're not making much progress on those fronts. And at the same time, we have a horrific debt load, which could be building, the next versions of Grand Coulee and the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Rural Electrification Agency, the REA, all those things that built the infrastructure in the first depression that allowed the United States to be a world powerhouse from then all the way until after the Korean War. And then we had a guy named Eisenhower in office who had the vision for the interstate highway project expansions that became the interstate freeway system that built the trucking industry, that built even more automobiles, and so on and so forth. We got some real serious problems, Mel, and the problem is that we need energy independence, and we don't have a national strategy to get there quickly. As a result, we're held hostage to certain conditions in the Middle East and Gulf of Mexico. And what can I tell you? I mean, there's very short term, until we figure out how to bring jobs back to America, we have our hands full, and I don't see a lot of improvement yet.
And if we have, 12 to $13 trillion, that's the total debt of the United States, and if you were to sell every asset of every citizen, it would amount to about 7 to 8 trillion. That leaves about 5 or 6 trillion. So how are we ever going to pay this?
Oh, we're not. We're going to do what every other country has done. We're going to inflate our way out of it. There's a really good historical example of how this works when the Weimar Republic, which was the caretaker government in Germany after World War II, made a conscious decision to skate on war reparations. And what they did is they deliberately printed more money than they actually should have, and the result was a very short-term 2 to 3 year period of hyperinflation, where literally you could take a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks in order to buy a meal, and people across the border, Alsace-Lorraine and so forth, they were just shocked to see what was going on with the German money. And yet, from a public policy standpoint, fact of the matter is that vicious inflations are manageable and are of a much shorter duration, generally, than protracted monetary deflation. Because you see, what happens in a deflation is you have an incentive to save and postpone purchasing. If you knew tomorrow, like I know, for example, that real estate is going to drop to approximately, let's say, 1/2 of its current valuations, or 1/2 of its current price. And let's say the wife and I have $10,000 in the bank, and we're going to buy a rental house. Do we buy the rental house today when our $10,000 is 10%? Or do we wait 2 years and take the same $10,000, which should be retaining its purchasing power because we're in a deflationary environment, and buy the thing when all of a sudden it's $50,000 and our $10,000 represents a 20% down payment instead of a 10% down payment, and we can then cash flow the thing immediately. See, that's what's bad about a deflation. In a deflation, you don't have an incentive to spend, you have an incentive to save. And we're flipping over into that, and the Fed hasn't been able to stop it. And until they get people to go into that spend now before prices go up, then we're going to be stuck where we are in deflation, and following on with that, lower stock prices, which means guys like me will be able to maybe buy a rental house someday.
And by the way, I wanted to ask you before we started the show, Cliff High, your friend, our mutual friend, he's a fixture on the show. How and when did you and Cliff converge and started working together?
This is a fun story. I was writing urban survival, living on my sailboat in San Francisco, and I was the vice president of admissions for a private technical college down in Fremont in mid-2001. And I got this email from a fellow in about May or so, and he said, okay, got Screwy Theory 153 here. And he explained how the future could be divined from reading the internet electronically. In other words, not reading it yourself, but extracting, as he does using the WebBot technology, shifts in language so that you could take a snapshot of the language 1 month and come back and take a snapshot of the language and use it a month later. And the way the language contexts had changed would give you some real hints as to what people are anticipating down at an archetype level. And so he and I exchanged notes, emails for probably a couple of weeks, and then I think it was July or so of 2001, I stuck my neck out, which I seem to do a fair bit of, and said, okay, here's this guy up in the Northwest, and let's just call him a think tank, and he's got this way of looking at the world, and it says things are going to forever change inside the next 45 to 90 days. And it will have aspects of military and accident. In fact, you can even see where we had some clouds drawn, data clouds over Las Vegas and the Philippines. And at that very time, little did we know, that was when the Al-Qaeda bombers were hanging out in Las Vegas, having their last hurrah before 9/11. So as soon as I woke up, my wife and I were living at on our sailboat at Oyster Point Marina down in South San Francisco, near the airport, and I woke up to watch CNN. We had, satellite TV on the boat and such, and woke up to watch the Twin Towers event. I'm going, oh my God, this guy Cliff nailed it. And I didn't realize how big the nails were. I mean, I'm thinking like 8-penny nail, right? These were like 32-penny galvanized spikes, because when he was talking about it would change forever how we live, I didn't know. I mean, no one could have conceived of terahertz wave scanners of people at airports and searches by TSA and all the other things that have changed. They've really become fixtures in the American way of life nowadays. And we're about to come across another tipping point like that, November of this year. I guess we can get into that a little bit later.
Sure.
So anyway, one thing led to another, and then Cliff followed up with attack on House or Assembly in advance of the anthrax attack, and numerous other forecasts. I mean, the number of forecast events that he's gotten right, especially on the really big stuff. I mean, some of the small stuff, yeah, I could see somebody could quibble and go, well, okay, yeah, that was right. But on the other hand, when we nail some of the big stuff, like we nailed, I say we because it was on my site, he does all the work and I get to take some of the credit. It's a great arrangement. I mean, it's really great, right? But we nailed things like the October 2008 financial smackdown. We nailed the China quake in March of 2008. Was it March or May? I guess it was May. Anyway, but that was called the wedding quake. And two weeks after the event, we're still kind of scratching our heads going, gee, was it just because it was close to the Jenna Bush or, the Bush family wedding, or what was that about? And then those pictures came out of China with all those people in front of that devastated church where everybody seemed to go to get their pictures taken, and there were all those wedding quake pictures. And we're going, oh, damn, that's what that meant. Okay. And there were other things. There was the Columbia disaster, got that right, unfortunately. The only bad part about working closely with Cliff is we have many, many long conversations that necessarily never see the light of day, although we are going to be doing a video shortly. He's just finished up putting some outriggers on his Umiak, which is a soft-sided West Coast Native people fishing boat, basically. And so we're going to go out in the Umiak here in a couple of 3 weeks and shoot a video and just talk about this. I mean, what's really amazing about the Internet is we've never met face-to-face. We've been working on this project since 2001. I've been up to Seattle a couple of times on business, and we've just never scheduled the time. And he's always either been hip deep in processing, or I've been on a short string for time. And we're actually scheduling time to go out and chill out, float around in the Umiak, do a little bit of sailing, because I love sailing. Cliffs is besides being a sequel guru and the expert of all the calculus predicates that go behind SQL. He's also a very good boatwright. So we're going to go out and float around. If his boatwright skills are any good, we'll both recover from that. And
well, I knew that. I didn't want to make it public, and now you did. I was going to say that 2 days ago, Cliff knew that I was going to interview you, and he said, "Please be gentle to my friend George Ure." Well, what the heck? No, he's coming to sail with me in the Umiak, so go ahead and do it.
We're both a little bit crazy about water, but I don't know if you know this, but there are some people that literally are addicted to negative ions. There's a wonderful book. You can find it sometimes in bookshops for like $3. One of the guys I interviewed, in fact, back in my news directoring days, wrote a book called The Ion Effect. And the ion effect is what happens is that the atmosphere is endowed with lots of negative ions of oxygen. And specifically what puts negative ions in the air is lightning storms, rain, being around cresting waves around the ocean and so forth. And people like me and Cliff are just like amped whenever we're around rain, lightning. In fact, in my office, I run a small negative ion generator all the time, simply because it is like walking into a shower. The mental alertness you get from these things, it's really cool when you tune into them. The other side of it is something called positive ions, and I have a very hard time.
And tell the audience that negative ions is actually a good thing, not a negative thing.
Yeah, negative ions are good for you. They are mentally uplifting. They add a lot of clarity to your thinking, and if you're the kind of person who needs a shower in the morning to really wake up, believe me, negative ion generators are the hot ticket. The positive ions are really bad for you, and if you want some examples of where positive ions occur, poorly constructed heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems in certain buildings cause a lot of negative positive ions to be released into the air. Certain kinds of carpet, especially plastic-type carpets in the wintertime, all of these contribute to something called sick building syndrome, and you can actually look that up and see it. And in certain parts of the world, winds that come down from hot, dry places cause an increase in suicide rates, depression, assaults, violent crime, and those winds are, in Greece, it's the Meltemi. In Algeria and North Africa, it's the Scirocco. And in Southern California, those are the Santa Ana winds. Yeah, and see, most people don't know that. I mean, but that's what Cliff and I enjoy, because we're both relatively well-read old farts. We're both. I'm not at Social Security yet, neither is he, but we're kind of, ambling up that way. We're in the over 50 crowd, and so we've had a lot of time to sit, read, digest, and think about stuff. And a lot of people our age just, turned on their TV 20 years ago and never got out of the chair. Neither one of us does that. We're both like perpetual students, And if I'm not surrounded by at least 500 books, I feel, almost unfulfilled. How can a person claim to be intellectually alive unless they're able to read a tremendous amount of material and keep adding to their information base?
You're both intellectual sponges.
Or vegetables. Yeah, we enjoy learning. I mean, when I was a vice president of admissions for a private college or two or three, I always told people, when I was considering if they should go to the college or not, are you really serious about becoming a lifetime learner, somebody who's going to go all the way through the next X number of years of your life soaking up information? Because if you make a commitment to keep gathering information, you cannot help but be more successful than people who do not put themselves on an intellectual training program, which is what new information does. Information to us is like the fertilizer. You can't have new ideas, make new connections in your brain unless you put some fertilizer in there every single day. And I've even got it down to I won't say a regimen, but I try to spend half an hour a day listening to some kind of loud rock and roll music because I happen to like loud rock and roll. But the reason I listen to loud rock and roll is I realize that I have to feed the right side of the brain, which is the poetry, music, yada, yada, yada side. And at the same time, I'll usually spend an hour or two a day reading an economic textbook, rereading Lessinger right now. But, anything in the library from, machine shop practices of the U.S. Navy foundryman in 1943 to something as current as software, design patterns in software engineering. So it's pretty much whatever we can find, we tend to wolf down and read. And when we get bored with new stuff, then we go back to some of the basics, like, my dog-eared copy of Accounting Principles is still around someplace, even though I've tried to simplify my life to minimize the amount of accounting I have to do. And that's, I guess, where effective living comes to play. All of this knowledge people get can be leveraged into a really neat lifestyle, provided that you're willing to turn off the TV and go consciously think about what you're putting in your head.
Well, that's why I call it the subliminal tube. He really hypnotizes you. But let's get to the meat of things, and we cannot ignore the elephant in the living room, George, the BP oil spill. This week, I did an interview with Dr. Brooks Agnew called Ecological, Economic, and Societal Implications of the Oil Spill. Let me expand on the economic and societal implications, since I'm sure you're analyzing this very carefully. If the oil volcano, as Cliff calls it, can't be stopped anytime soon, and BP claims they'll be capping it by the end of July, or July 27th to be specific, paint for us a scenario of how life in the United States will look like, especially to people living in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas.
Ain't going to like it. Just flat ass ain't going to like it at all, Mel. I have a subscriber newsletter called Peoplenomics that's $40 a year. And my readers were asking me the same question a month ago. Okay, paint the picture. What's going to happen? What happens is, if the BP guys are not able to do an injection of junk and get the thing shut off by, say, the middle of August, there will be an increasing hue and cry from all over the place, and I mean worldwide, because this thing is going to start impacting Europe, the fishing grounds off Europe by this fall, and the economic devastation it will become planetary in scale. And so the very first thing that will happen is we will start seeing additional tar balls washing up on the beach in places like Texas. We'll see more than the initial reported 4 people, I think it is now, dead from respiratory complications from fumes in the area. We don't know if that's hydrogen sulfide or what. The continuing spill means that sooner or later a hurricane is likely to pick up at least some level of pollution and push it up into the southeast. And it could be any place from the Rio Grande Valley in Mexico on the south all the way over to coming ashore, Miami or Tampa, St. Pete area. We just don't know. We don't know if it's going to pick up oil or if the oil is simply going to start migrating because of prevailing winds, any of that stuff. But at some point, probably, I'm guessing September, October, we'll start seeing people voluntarily leaving Florida and heading north and trying to find a different way to live away from the oil smell. Now, in Cliff's work, we've got 40 degrees, or roughly the Mason-Dixon line, as a safe zone. Now, it doesn't mean it'll be unsafe south of there. It just means we don't know where south of there will be safe. My wife and I live on a 30-acre ranch in East Texas. We're 526 miles from the spill, 185 miles from the Gulf Coast at the closest point. We think we'll be okay, but we are willing to sell our property, which is a very well-equipped, solar backup power and a well and goat herd and machine shop and wood shop and everything else. We're willing to sell our home because we're not especially attached to the South, but then again, we're not much attached to anything. And so we're willing to fall back to a position in the Pacific Northwest because we have a lot of family up in that area. Or alternatively, we may go to Colorado where one of Elaine's boys is, and that'd put us about equidistant between the kids. There are going to be, if the thing does not stop by, say, middle of August, we expect, or I expect, to start seeing the mass migration, and I'm hearing informally that it's already close to impossible to reserve a U-Haul to leave Florida right now because everything is getting booked up. A friend of mine who's a physician, due to the nature of his practice, he can practice anywhere and just fly and do whatever he needs to do. Moved back to Chicago this week from living down at South Beach in Miami. And he was very pleased to be in Chicago. And even there, he is looking at putting together a bug-out vehicle, which makes a lot of sense. The reason it makes a lot of sense is that when we start seeing the large-scale evacuation of the Gulf Coast, even if it's only 100 miles inland, you're talking at that point on the order of perhaps 5 to 10 million people being relocated north. That has tremendous economic implications. The first is it could collapse the economic system. The specific mechanism of collapse is as follows. Let's say that you've got 10 million people, and underneath it, that's maybe 2.5 million homes. 2.5 million homes at an average price of maybe $200,000 per mortgage. You can pencil out the numbers on that, and they get to be pretty horrific. That's a lot of mortgages for people to be walking away from. And even though they may be bundled with mortgages from outside of the collapse zone, what's going to happen to the valuation of those securities, those mortgage packages, the CMOs, the collateralized mortgage obligations that are funding everything from college endowments to pension funds and so forth. So you've got that. The next thing you've got is you have all the commercial real estate that would then collapse with that. Figure there's probably a dollar for dollar ratio. I mean, just to throw a dart at the wall, you've got all those factories, all those hotels, all that tourism infrastructure. When the smell of oil becomes apparent in Florida, will people be going to places like Orlando to visit the amusement parks? Don't know. I kind of sort of doubt it. And if they do, will there be residents who are willing to put up with the smells for more than a couple of weeks at a time? I don't know the answer.
And George?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that Florida is the number one destination in the world.
In the world
and
for tourism, yeah.
for tourism, and it has about 75 million visitors every year, $57 billion in revenue. I mean, that alone kills the whole economy.
Well, it didn't kill the whole economy. Remember, the U.S. GDP is running about $13 billion. I'm sorry, $13 trillion.
Well, I meant Florida.
Yeah, it kills Florida for sure. But you start adding it all up. You look at the Obama administration is going in. They're going to, regardless of what happens, they're going to make sure that there is a continued ban on drilling until there can be serious review of what's going on in the Gulf. That makes sense. Don't want to have another one of these going on. This one is horrible enough and may be a planet killer by itself. You have to look at what's the cost of all the commercial real estate, the lost jobs, and in a lost job economy, strangely enough, there may be a long-term benefit to abandoning a good chunk of the South, because all those people going north are going to need housing, going to need shopping, going to need, right? So maybe, but more than balancing that off, we have the collapse of confidence in the debt structures that will accompany it. So can we avoid a financial panic this fall and make it all the way till Christmas without it? Kind of doubtful. Now, there is one way out, and the one way out, I hate to say it, is to start another war. Because if we had a major war breakout, and you talk to Cliff, you know what's in the data.
Sure.
If we had a major war breakout, that would certainly be a major distraction and an excuse for martial law and so forth. So is that all in the cards for November when we hit our big tipping point? Don't know, but to give you an idea of the scale, the 9/11 tipping point in 2001 was a matter of 3 to 4 hours, and then about a week or so as we worked through the emotional pain of losing 2,700 odd people at the Twin Towers. This event that's coming up in November of this year is not going to be a 4.5-hour event. It is, and it's not going to be in the U.S. It's going to start in the U.S., and it's going to be an event lasting 4 days, maybe as many as 96 hours total. And then the wailing and gnashing of teeth about all the dead, injured, missing, whatever, is going to carry us through into early to mid 2011. Now, I don't know about you, but I just can't think of very many things that could cause that kind of emotional release. What could have 100, 200, 300 times the impact of 9/11? Global thermonuclear war? Yeah, that's a possibility. And is there a migration path? Let's say, for example, that either this weekend or in following weeks, Israel finally says, okay, can't wait any longer, must go deal with Iran's nuclear weapons program. Whether they have a weapons program, I think, is almost beyond debate. I think they have to be fools not to be if you have all that uranium sitting around and you have designs on being a regional power. I mean, that's just how that stuff works. So I can't picture a happy ending to November. Maybe what will come instead will be a massive gas bubble release due to an earthquake, and that in turn will set off New Madrid, and New Madrid quake then takes out much of the southeast infrastructure, as well as possibly causing subsidence of some number of feet, changing the course of the Mississippi. And I think there's a Hopi prophecy about the Great Lakes draining out. So I'm not sure that's any happier than global thermonuclear war. Not to say that it's going to happen, but linguistically it's a high probability.
And at the beginning of the show, you mentioned that 9/11 was a distraction for what could have been a depression when the dot-com bubble burst.
It was a bait and switch.
Yes, a bait and switch, exactly. We were focusing on that area, and then all of a sudden, now it's more important to focus on the people who passed away and so on, and now the wars. Could the same thing be happening? And let me go back one moment to the Weimar Republic.
And the short answer is yes, by the way. Yes, it may be that this is simply the offspring of 9/11 brought forward, and we could be in a replay of 9/11 at the moment. So, yeah, this could be the bait and switch.
And many people say, don't compare 9/11 to this oil spill. But you start looking at the similarities of the shorting, of the, all the companies dumping, Goldman Sachs dumping 44%, Wachovia 97%, the CEO of BP dumping 1/3 of his shares and paying his mansion in Kent. A lot of similarities between 9/11. Oh, and the double insurance policy on the Transocean oil platform. Do you see a lot of these similarities materializing once again?
A person would have to be a damn fool not to. The problem is who benefits. It always comes down to cui bono. Who's making the bucks on this stuff? Not you and me. And the interesting thing is how it all plays out so that there's a national level of distraction. You know what ends up happening because of the BP thing? We could have, just to give you an idea, when we get into the runaway part of this fall, when people are smelling oil and starting to get sick on a widespread basis down in Florida and the Gulf and so forth, what could very easily happen would be we could see contracts for commodities go through force majeure, where people who put money in good faith into commodity contracts will be told just plain old, so sorry, you lose. And there are provisions for force majeure or what happens in the event of war kinds of things. And certainly this is that kind of an event. There may be extreme legal responses which would nullify and not be acceptable in peacetime terms, but because we're facing an environmental emergency, we may have that shoved down our throat that's the excuse for BP not doing right by people. I'm sure you've seen how the fishermen are waiting for their checks. They're finding their checks are being delayed and so forth. And BP put up $20 billion, which is sorry, that's not a pot to piss in compared to losing maybe as much as $1 trillion of productivity from the economy. Look at tourism, look at fishing, look at real estate, look at manufacturing, look at all the military infrastructure that just goes away. Is something like Pensacola Naval Operations, for the big Naval Air Station, Pensacola, huge training facility, and then there's Fort Benning, Georgia, and how far up will evacuations possibly take us down the road? Not saying that they will, but as I point out to folks in this diaspora handbook that I've done, you got to always take the worst case, build a plan to deal with the worst case. Then and only then can you step back and say, okay, if anything better happens, then I'm all that much further ahead. So, for example, if you said, what can an average person who lives in Florida do right now today, I'd say, I don't know, Mel, maybe take a little vacation with a family, go up north someplace, buy a little $10,000 to $20,000 piece of property out in the middle of nowhere up in Michigan or Wisconsin, park maybe a little trailer on it, get a little,
start scouting when you can.
Yeah. And not only that, but, Elaine and I are thinking through the possibility of getting driver's licenses and having our local we lived on a sailboat, so we've had a private mailbox before in the Seattle area. We thought real seriously on our trip coming up when we go up to the Northwest to, visit Cliff and visit kids and so on and so forth, getting driver's licenses. And even so far as getting a car registered in Washington, because look, if you're in an evacuation situation, think through how government's going to try and manage it. You're going to look at cars on the road. Car comes toward you, and it's from Florida. You go over this way and follow that car over there because you're all going down to a resettlement location.
FEMA camps.
On the other hand, if you're coming out of Florida and it says New York and you look like a stockbroker, what are you going to do? You're going to send the guy to a resettlement camp? He said, "Look, here's my driver's license. Here's my car. I'm just trying to get back home, Bubba. I got me a job. I got to be at work day after tomorrow." Oh well.
Good point.
So so it doesn't take a lot of brain power to kind of look ahead and say, okay, what's the sorting going to be, and how do I avoid getting sorted into that recycled useless eater department coming out of the South without a job or a pot to piss in, right?
Exactly. And this is exactly what I want to do in segment 2 of this show. We're giving people, this is not fear-mongering, folks.
No. It's thinking ahead, Mel.
Exactly. And weeks ago, we started talking about the possibilities of relocations. And many people thought, oh, you're engaging in conspiracy theory. That is not the case anymore. I can tell you, because every couple of days, I'm getting email from people who are relocating and leaving. And this is a good time to not leave, but at least what George is saying, start scouting for property. And what a great idea. So if you can't afford it, buy a car or get a license. Because when this happens, and I hate to use the proverbial hits the fan, then you're going to be out of luck when you have millions of people on the road. Just go back to 2005 during Katrina. What happened? The government could not handle it. And let me just say something before we go into break, George. I received some information that Rupert Murdoch, George Soros, and Bill Gates heavily invested in the company that manufactures Corexit, which is the dispersant being used. And folks, if you remember last year, Rupert Murdoch, through his mother, has a foundation that invested heavily in the swine flu vaccine.
Oh, yes.
Almost as if controlled population, or as Bill Gates calls it, Planned Parenthood. Could this be one of the variables of this false flag event, George?
Oh, sure. No question about it, Mel. I guess that's what we need to talk about in segment 2.
Absolutely. Tell us once again how to get in touch with your great work.
Well, I don't know about the great work. I think that's always yet to be written. The stuff I've done so far is at urbansurvival.com, and then I do in-depth reports for subscribers over at peoplenomics.com, and always willing to share. I mean, ideas are supposed to be free, and this is a free country. Enjoy it while it is.
We have a lot more to talk about. We have plenty of questions from the audience and a lot of material to cover. This is Mel Fabregas. You're listening to Veritas. Don't go anywhere. Thank you very much for listening. We're going to talk more with our special guest in our members section. Head on over to our website, veritasshow.com. Click on subscribe and join us in the members area to tune in to the second part of this great show. We'll take a short break, listen to some music, and we'll be right back with more.
Temptation. Temptation. Ooh, you're too hot for me.
This is Catherine Austin Fitz, and you're listening to the Veritas Show. This is Catherine Austin Fitz, and you're listening to the Veritas Show.
And welcome back to Veritas. This is Mel Fabregas, and I'm here with George Ure from urbansurvival.com. Before the break, I was asking George of all the things I'm getting via email lately and that I'm still confirming. In the past, I would think it was an exaggeration, but not anymore. George, it's day 81 since the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster began weeks ago. The notion of people being relocated or fleeing from the Gulf was considered fear-mongering back then. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. People are already leaving, and I know, as I said before, because I'm getting these emails. Now, some people estimate that if, in a worst-case scenario, we're talking about 40 to 50 million people. Have you estimated the number of people who could be fleeing?
Yeah, initially it may not be that much. I sat down with a copy of Microsoft, and that just tells you what a boring life I have out here on our ranch, right? I was able to sit down for about 4 hours, whip out Microsoft Streets and Trips, and draw a bunch of different circles, and then zoom in, and then hit the internet and start adding up populations. And I guess it isn't too bad if you look at, the first little bit of evacuation, which would be Louisiana, a little bit of Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. It's not a little bit. I mean, it's incredibly painful if you happen to be in those areas. But the initial round of dispersal of humans might be on the order of 2 to 3 million. Now, 2 to 3 million people is a hell of a lot of people. And what makes this one interesting, unlike Katrina and Rita, is that we have a lot more time to play with. The problem, however, is where are these people going to go? And right. that's the individual matter of choice. I'm always a happy-go-lucky, plan-ahead sort of fellow. And as I told my doctor friend who was down in Miami, I said, why are you not back in Chicago? He called me today and said, okay, I'm back in Chicago. I was really proud of him. If you don't have to be in these areas, you don't want to ruin the economy by not taking a Florida vacation. But on the other hand, you don't want to be going and taking a bath in Corexit or any of the other dispersants that may be in use in the Gulf. So what do you do? Oh, we didn't touch on cruise ships either, did we, Mel?
No, we didn't.
Oh, see, here's another ugly thing to think about, and not to think about ugly things, but you know how many cruise ships go through the Bahamas and go through Key West and Cozumel and places like that there, or come into Houston, Galveston for a port. A lot of those cruise ships, yeah. I mean, so and think about what that ripples. I mean, just follow this one vertical market. You're going to have impacts on airlines, airline baggage handlers, TSA employment, rental cars, the overnight hotel groups that have been sitting, waiting for their cruise ships to pull out. You get in a day early and, transfer onto the ship in the morning, kind of thing. So all that kind of business could be impacted. I haven't contacted any of the cruise lines yet to see what their contingency plans are for their fall cruises, but it might be very instructive as a timing tool to start looking at when the cruise ships start modifying their routes and start going elsewhere. Now, where were we? Oh, yes, when to leave. A matter of personal choice. I think you'll be able to spread out departures fairly well, but what you want to do well ahead of time is figure out where you're going to land up north. And the way you could do that is you could talk to people as part of your church, or if you belong to any clubs or organizations or trade groups, or if you work for a company with locations in other parts of the country and you happen to be down in a real close proximity to the Gulf, might want to think about things like that. Now, the best possible case would be that the Gulf turns into a non-issue and BP is able to plug it by, say, the middle of August, in which case then something kind of, flipping things around, then might be a time when you could possibly find some real bargains in Gulf Coast real estate, because Gulf Coast real estate prices are likely to decline rapidly pending the resolution of the uncertainty. So if you've thought about timeshare on the beach someplace, boy, I'd be standing by with cash at the ready as soon as I got confirmation that the oil has actually been shut off. But it's got to be shut off, not just dramatically slowed, because once it's dramatically slowed, because of the reaming effect of all the high-pressure oil, it's very easy that it could pop back open again, kind of like I won't say squeezing a pimple, but you got the idea.
Of course, and it also makes you wonder that there has been erosion to the or edging to the casing. With this coming at such a high speed, it makes you wonder if once they feel, and I'm sure they have mathematicians who have gone and drafted models to do this right. But this is a very unknown. We're talking about 30,000 feet of this casing that could have eroded for over 80 days. And the moment you cap it, it may actually go and explode somewhere in the middle. And you're creating yourself a bigger problem, don't you think?
Not really. I'm not too worried about that, because remember that even though some of the pressure numbers are very, very big when you're talking about undersea ocean depth, you get to subtract back out of that whatever the pressure is 1 mile down to begin with. So, yeah, those are some mighty big numbers and mighty high pressure numbers that have been kicked around in the media. But I'm not. I know some people down in the Gulf who have done. One friend of mine had an oil well bit manufacturing company that was acquired here some months back, and we've talked a little bit about it. He's not terribly worked up over the situation yet. What he's worried about is how long it will keep going, and nobody really knows the answer to that yet. So I guess if I were in Florida with my wife, and if we could find a way to get the hell out, we'd probably be hitting farm real estate sites like UnitedCountry.com, trying to find that 5 to 10 acre parcel cheap up in Ohio or someplace up above 40 degrees north, where we could at least put up a mailbox, buy a beater vehicle, put on the property, so that we have a vehicle with a license, and at least appear to have some northern roots, as opposed to people who are pretty much obviously southern Florida or along the Gulf people who don't necessarily have a landing spot, and those are the people who I think, just based on how things have worked out in the past, will have their freedom most at risk.
I remember during Katrina when a lot of the residents wanted to leave through the bridge and they were turned back. But let's take this a step further, because this evacuation variable of the equation is so important. Have you looked into the impact these evacuees will have on the destination cities, and what would those destination cities be? I hear California is bracing for many of them.
Yeah, it all really depends on how much money people get out of Florida with. See, that's another thing that causes ripples in the economy that are really hard to forecast. Let's say a family of 5, the standard 2.5 kids and 1.5 working adults kind of thing. They decide, okay, we're going to go find a new life in California. They go to California, they're in their car, and that's all they've got. Their car, some clothes for the kids and the grown-ups, and maybe tools of the trade, possibly a laptop, and a couple of 3 credit cards and some family heirlooms. How much are these people going to be able to bring with them? $3,000, maybe $5,000 at best. And then what are they going to do once they get to California? Do they just drop onto unemployment in Florida? Do they hit the soup kitchens, or what happens? And California is not in a very good position to be able to receive people at the moment.
No,
because the state's already verging on bankruptcy. Schwarzenegger and company have their hands full trying to get state workers paid for things like just watching over prisons and so forth. So it becomes really a very ugly picture. Now, the good news, if there is some, is maybe it could revitalize places like Las Vegas. Or it could, on the other side of it, just create the world's biggest squatter problem in half-abandoned cities like Las Vegas or some of the places in Arizona. There are mile after suburban homes in Arizona that are unoccupied or underoccupied or already being squatted in. So,
but how do you do that? How do you do that in the summer at 110 degrees?
Yeah, that becomes the really terrible part. Unfortunately, there are people in the lower echelon of society who will, for a price, jump around meters and expose people to all kinds of safety issues. The law enforcement and public safety issues that go with this kind of a thing on the receiving end are going to be horrific. You're going to have people living in parks. You're going to have soup kitchens. You're going to have people going hungry. People going hungry do what now? They turn to crime. So you're going to see a big uptick in crime. You're going to see just about every bad thing you can imagine is likely when you get in some of these landing zones. And people aren't going to go to, rural East Texas or rural Oklahoma to land. They're going to go to places where they got some TV coverage, there's some social services, and there's some prospect of employment. And so that means the northern cities. I guess I wouldn't be comfortable being in a place like Kansas City or St. Louis or Nashville, maybe Memphis, Chicago, any place in Ohio, Tennessee. That's where people are going to be showing up in some pretty good numbers. If you were a real estate speculator buying up some raw land parcels, cutting it up into 10-acre tracts and selling it might make sense. But is that really profiteering, or is that providing a public service? Then you need to sit back and say, okay, what's the ethical thing for somebody not in the impact zone to do, if anything? How do we as a nation provide help while at the same time not just throwing good money after bad?
And I'm so glad you're talking about this, because it's a balance. But take Florida. For anybody who thinks that people are not reacting to this already, U-Haul has already been caught price gouging 2 times, 3 times the normal rental rates. But again, I talk about this all the time, George. I get phone calls from friends who say to me, Mel, I'm concerned for you and your family being there in the desert. I really appreciate their concern, but what about the people who are lucky enough to have a job and live paycheck to paycheck, or a businessman who depends on daily revenues to survive? How can they pack and go? There are many people who have depleted their savings with the economy as it is. They're already in survival mode. If they move, they will require a continual flow of money, food, lodging. That's not free. This is one of the most important and frequently asked questions I get, George.
Yeah, and really the way to do it, like let's say you're a businessman and you could move your company, then it is probably appropriate about now, given that the oil has not been turned off, to begin a contingency plan and identify a new home for your company someplace other than Florida if it's light manufacturing. You may be able to find somebody up north, a state with a better tax situation. They may not have the weather, the beaches, and so forth, but they won't have Corexit washing up on the beach. So what do? At what point does a small business owner become the visionary leader for all of his employees and say, look, let's have a company meeting. Here's our 100 employees. What's our plan? And the plan, in my opinion, could be something like having 2 or 3 people from the company appoint a steering committee to develop a serious strategic plan to move the company out of harm's way if it's in a likely to be oil-impacted area. If that's the case, then the steps would be identify how tough it will be to move the manufacturing equipment, ask how tough it will be to find a landlord who's going to front the company 6 months of rent, and maybe even participate in return for long-term returns from the company in rents and so forth, fronting some of the relocation costs for the company's equipment and fixtures. So and that doesn't take a lot of doing. I mean, that can be done. Whether the government will come up with special programs to do that, maybe, but I doubt that'll happen much before October, November, and by then it may be too late. By then there may be enough oil smell and enough stuff coming out of the well, if it's not closed off by then, that it will be uncomfortable, if not downright unhealthy, to be in the area. So at this point, it's all in the matter of contingency planning and figuring out what your worst case plan is, and then stick by target dates. If the well is not shut off by August 15, I'm going to start looking for property in the following areas. If it is not closed off by September 15, I'm going to close on a property in these areas in this price range. If the well isn't shut off by October 1st, I'm going to go visit the property, have a mailbox, relicense my car in a different state, get my local driver's license, put a cheap trailer or whatever you can find to put on the property so that it looks like a residence of some kind. And then when I got up to the property, I'd be going to the bank and lining up whatever financing was necessary to bring in water, a septic tank, and an electric hookup, and a telephone of some kind, so you can at least get some basic connectivity of services. And even if it's only dial-up internet, at least you'd then be able to, fall back into something. A person, I think, if they could put together $25,000 from life savings, might be able to get by with that for starting over.
This is somebody, you're referring to a segment of the population, but let's also focus on 2 segments of the population. One, the one that you very aptly mentioned, the family of 2 kids, the parents driving somewhere with, $5,000, which is not going to go that far. That segment of the population. And then you have the unemployed, and then you have those who have a job, they're not business owners, who have paycheck to paycheck. How can those people make it?
With great difficulty. It's going to be hell on earth. That's what diasporas are all about. I mean, Cliff picked that word out of the linguistics, a year and a half ago when it started popping up. And diaspora is not the new Facebook alternative. Diaspora is this getting up and moving around the country. These things aren't going to be without a lot of pain. It is going to hurt those least able to afford it the most. There's no question about that. How do we ameliorate that pain? I think every state should be developing now a receiving plan for areas like, let's say, Dallas. Dallas is over 200 miles from the coast. Places like Tyler, Texas, are right on the border. Places like Amarillo, places like Lubbock, they can certainly accommodate a few folks, but it needs to be a pass-through so that people can get to other parts of America. America's a huge and largely empty country in places like Wyoming and Montana, the Dakotas, and so
Idaho.
forth. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of big, wide open spaces. What we need to do is get a plan for states that have been so far relatively untouched by the recession, relatively untouched by the real discomfort, and ask them to come on board with the rest of us. I can't help but think, not to pick on Wyoming. Wyoming probably has fiscal issues, as does every place else, but it's a relatively lesser populated state, and maybe Wyoming could come up with new businesses, new opportunities, and so forth. Detroit, a lot of abandoned housing in Detroit being bulldozed. Maybe the bulldozers should be put on hold for a little while and figure out how we, rebuild parts of Detroit and reindustrialize America. Part and parcel of this, Mel, may be the government finally having to recognize that the whole idea of laissez-faire capitalism, the hands-off, the big globalist agenda, let us outsource jobs from America to wherever else in the world, maybe that turns out to really be a bankrupt policy, and maybe something as simple as an employer credit for creating new jobs in America, a tax credit for some period of time, would help bring some of those jobs home. I mean, we've already identified 8 million jobs have left America for good. It only takes a simple tax on imported services not provided by Americans, put a surcharge on it, and all of a sudden we could get 8 million jobs back in a heartbeat, but that would take some people with balls in Washington who are willing to step up and say, okay, globalism's over, we got problems to solve in America.
So the problem is that the globalists are the ones who employ the lobbyists who are, of course, we have the best government that money can buy, and we know it. But how about the people who will refuse to leave the Gulf and may die as a result of the poisoned atmosphere, poisoned air?
Well, people choose to die, Mel, in a million different ways. People choose to die from driving too fast and not wearing seat belts. People die because they can't get a hold of their drug and alcohol abuse problems. People die because they don't eat proper. People die because they get hooked on speed. People die because they become part of gangs and end up getting beat down, and all the rest of the ways people die. People make choices in life. They're not all good choices, but at some level in a free country, dying is really a choice. It's not something government should be able to make a decision on, but people who want to stay in a hazardous condition, at some point government's got to say, we came, we tried to rescue you. Here's the way out if you change your mind, but we're out. And people will or will not meet their ends as they set themselves up to meet.
Have you heard of the operational name of the Gulf Coast evacuation, Operation Swift Fox?
Yeah, I've heard Swift Fox mentioned, but until I see it in an official government publication, I have yet to see the documentation of FEMA or any state or local agency using that name. I've seen it reported. I have not seen underlying documentation.
And what I'm going to read comes from Stephen Quayle. You may know who Stephen Quayle is.
Oh, sure, I know Steve. Yeah.
He says specific towns in Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, and Georgia were having hotel rooms rented en masse by different named societies using federal government credit cards. The block hotel room rentals are for half the available rooms in hotels with a minimum of 120 rooms. And this quote is from an insider who is really concerned, as he should. Here's additional information he provided. His comments in the following quote, I know FEMA has already scoped out FEMA camp locations, vacant lots and swaths of land, and can be leased temporarily in Texas and Georgia, unquote. Are these Rex 84 prison camps, George? And if so, how can they hold so many millions of people?
Oh, boy, that's a very, very touchy question. Let's back up. Suppose that you're the government. How would you handle, let's say, 20 million people over a 6-month period exiting from around the Gulf of Mexico? I mean, just between you and Mel. Mel, what would you do? How would you handle it?
The only way I could possibly see it, aside from the people who don't have any relatives, would be, I hate to say it, but it would have to be in an open space, tent city type of scenario.
Okay. And where would you put all of these tent city people somewhere near big cities, or would you keep them deliberately away from big cities?
That's a very good question. It would be wherever the utilities could be provided to them, and hopefully close to big cities, because as you said, if we can't create jobs and create manufacturing, a lot of these people wouldn't mind probably working for minimum wage, because at least that would keep them alive.
Now, let's carry this further. Would you encase these facilities? Let's say we've got 10,000 tent facility someplace up in North Texas, someplace up maybe near Oklahoma. We got a place. We got water. We got power. We've got parade grounds or maybe a state fairgrounds that we could convert. Would you ensure that area is single point of ingress, single point of access, or would you let people just kind of drift in and drift out from all locations, or would you try to control access so that people don't rip off stuff and take it out of the facilities?
That's a good question, and it almost is like the Red Dawn scenario. I can't even envision fencing this area around because, as I said, it sounds more like a Rex 84 prison camp.
Well, yeah, but you see that the problem from a practical management standpoint, and this is the rock and hard spot FEMA gets into in contingency planning. I mean, because I've done corporate contingency planning, and you have to, you may call it a prison camp, and yeah, it may be refugees, but what's your alternative? I mean, if you just put a bunch of tents out someplace and don't have any police authority or civil authority, and you just say, "Oh, okay, people, here is a meal place over here. Come by every day at 4:00 and we'll feed you." Is that going to be a nice place to be? I don't think so. I think there'd be people coming in and out at all hours of days and nights. So the people need some kind of police force, and there need to be boundaries around the community so that things don't get stolen and ripped off, and attacks by outsiders or insiders running off with your stuff that your last little picture of your cousin Nellie. I mean, is that a prison camp, or is that actually operating in the public interest, need, and concern? I mean, it can be argued both ways.
Yeah.
Now, if the people that you put into these camps were singled out for their political views, like George appeared with Mel on a radio show, therefore he goes in this really ugly camp over here, then that's...
I don't mean to laugh.
Yeah, that would be a prison camp. although I'd probably do it again. But if it's a genuine, sincere humanitarian effort, and you're trying to transition people out who otherwise would be robbing, cheating, stealing, living on the streets of a big city, which would you rather have? Toilet facilities, meals, and a tent, or living on a street someplace with your 3 kids?
Right.
Exactly. And you tell me, Mel. I mean, is that a prison camp? I don't think so, but.
It's just that, George, we have never, in our lifetime at least, those of us who did not grow up during the Depression, and some people had to sleep on the streets, and as you say, bring money to buy some bread. We have grown to be dependent on the government. We have grown to be dependent on technology, and there's not that many people out there who can look into urban survival and exceed and excel, doing what they need to do to survive.
Yeah, but remember during the 30s event when we had the last terrible economic depression, what happened?
Right.
We had the CCC camps. People went to camps out in the woods, national parks, national forests. They built facilities. They took the land and they converted it into something that's been really a wonderful thing. I mean, most of the national park system was originally built out during the Depression, right? So you have to sit back and say, well, gosh, how do we turn this national disaster into something that's going to be really positive for the whole country? And I'll tell you, if I were in a position of responsibility and authority, I would look at, to a certain degree, not saying government is perfect. I would never be so foolish as to advance that, especially when Congress is in session. But the other side of it is that there's a tremendous amount of anti-Obama, anti-administration feeling being whipped up by the right, and certainly there are people that are putting a political agenda on it. And as soon as I hear an emotional hot word like prison camp or some other label which is designed to get a visceral response, I have to, and thank you, Mel, for having the intellectual integrity to sit with me here as I go through okay, Mel and George now run America for 5 minutes. How are we going to deal with it? And what did we decide? We decided, well, yeah, we need to have lots of these little installation kind of campy things, and they need to have food, and they need to have this, and they need to have that. And so what should be happening right now? Well, golly, maybe FEMA ought to be training people in Florida and the Gulf Coast states how to cook for 500 guests for dinner. And maybe there should be some kind of thought being given to where do we put people from a massive event like this. And if we don't need it hope to God it happens. Maybe BP gets it shut off by middle of August. And so we don't need it there. But what happens if we get a false flag terrorist attack? The same problem comes back and bites us on the butt again. How do we deal with a mass relocation issue from any urban area? Yeah, if it was in the Gulf, maybe it would be a false flag or other attack on American infrastructure. The planning problem remains pretty much the same. Where do you put people? And frankly, unless people are held to some level of control and accountability, they go animal. I mean, you saw the pictures of people's behavior inside of the Superdome and the
Absolutely.
mess that was created there. I can't believe that people act so badly in herds, and yet, son of a gun, if they don't. So what's FEMA to have learned from that lesson? Small groups, some kind of management structure. Do you get out razor wire? Well, no, but how do you contain people in an area? These are hard questions, and unfortunately, it can be, depending on who's selling the story, it's either a prison camp or it's a great humanitarian rescue effort. And when it comes along, I prefer to take the middle ground, saying it's a national tragedy. Let's figure out what today's agenda is, which is feed, house, provide toilet facilities, a shower now and then, and for the personal security of people's minimal property that they can carry, which might include, a few personal documents and so forth, so that they don't have the little bit of their life ripped off from them when they're trying to reorient themselves outside the Gulf.
And you and Cliff continue to talk about the November tipping point, and which may have 4 days, whereas 9/11 we had 4 hours.
Right.
And I keep talking about this. You know how Hollywood sometimes gives us some subliminal messages to prepare for the future. You know where I'm going. Have you ever seen the series Jericho?
Oh, sure. The breakup of America stuff.
Exactly. And what happened days before the elections?
I didn't watch all of the series.
Well, a lot of the bombings, they call them micro nukes, if you will, in several big cities were happening one day after the other. Here you're talking about 4 days. What is it that you call it in that period, which was 4 hours during September the 11th?
Yeah. The tipping, the actual tipping point. But
exactly.
I don't think it's going to be something like that because it's global. It starts in the U.S., but it quickly becomes global. And the only things that can have this kind of carry value, this kind of disappearing data from the internet. I mean, really, we're in a hell of a spot because most of the internet goes down as far as data collection is concerned, and we fall into what Cliff calls the data gap. Sometime early next year, and then the internet seems to disappear. And unfortunately, there aren't too many things that can account for that, short of A, global thermonuclear war, or B, global complete financial meltdown of everything, such that nobody trusts anybody. The global financial meltdown probably gets us closer to a Jericho kind of a situation, because when the global financial system melts down, what is George going to have on his ranch besides a gun that's going to get him through that period of time? The answer is 2 guns. No.
We don't mean to laugh, but we have to. It's important to have a little bit of humor during dire
exactly. And the other thing is if we have a complete collapse of the financial system and you happen to be not in a Gulf Coast state, are you any better off? Maybe not, because what happens if your city depends on electricity? The people actually might be better off in one of these, FEMA landing zones if the power goes off in a big city like New York. I mean, you don't think about it much if you're in New York. I've been in New York. I love New York. I used to stay in the penthouse at Lowe's all the time. It was great. I love traveling to New York. The food, the views, and everything. But do you think I want to be in New York when the power goes off? Hell no. I don't want to be anywhere near the place. I came in one day, I forget what year it was, but I came in one day from LaGuardia to Midtown. And on the way into town, I was just in town for a couple of quick meetings. Came in the morning about 9 o'clock. There was a car pulled over on the side of the freeway. And by the time I went back, going the other way, going back out that very afternoon, that car had been stripped, Mel. There weren't doors on it. The engine was gone. The body was stripped out. There were no seats in it. The headlights had been surgically removed. I mean, it was bones, man. And that's the kind of stuff that goes, I won't say, well, it is almost like becomes society-wide as soon as the lights go off. So if we have global financial meltdown, all of a sudden those contracts to deliver coal, those contracts to deliver oil, all that crap gets thrown out the window, my friend. So there goes your internet connectivity. There goes your lights. There goes your water because it runs on power. I mean, the possibilities of how ugly life will be if we have a global financial meltdown. I mean, it's to the point where in my own family, our kids up in the Seattle area have plans to come to Texas on horseback, coming down the high desert on the backside of the Cascades, and they have maps and GPS and a travel plan and a comms plan, the whole thing, and food and arms and so forth. I mean, they'll make it. My sister will probably lead the way because she's big on long distance horseback rides. But how many people, Mel, do you know that have contingency plans like that for if this? Yeah, I mean, nobody does. And is that paranoia on my part? Or in a very uncertain world, is that really a best faith effort at striving for the ultimate of urban survival? I mean, that's what's really important in here is in order to help the kids, in order to help restart society, first you got to make it through the bad stuff. And if you don't have a plan to make it through the bad stuff, you ain't going to be there on the other side to help anybody, and you're just going to be one more body to bury. And so people.
But what happens? What happens to people, for example, Catherine Austin Fitts, she talks about cooperatives of people who farm their own food and barter between each other, and it's just a close community. Then you have the Mennonites who live off the grid. What happens when there's a preponderance of people? And I hate to even think about this, George, but bear with me. You have people with children who may not be able to feed their children, and they have to do what they wouldn't even imagine to do before, and they have to swallow their pride and their ego in order for their kids to swallow food. What happens when they have to go out there and hunt for food or maybe steal? What's going to happen to those people on both sides, those who are hunters and those who are like you with the two rifles pointing outside of your fence?
That's a good question. Kind of a bloody answer. I'm not sure you really want it. In terms of here, we will share to our limited ability to share. We are planning on having more than just us to share with. We know people in the local community who will probably become part of our enclave. And they'll be invited. They'll be warmly welcome because it takes a lot of people to keep a piece of property operating, secure and producing. On the other hand, if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, will you share your last bit of food with me?" Sure, of course. Now that's probably stupid on my part, but I'm trying. Don't show up looking for food right away, and certainly our place is not on maps for a very good reason. But yeah, you try to share, but you try to build the community. We're coming to a time, Mel, when it's almost going to be if this thing in November is as bad as it looks in the linguistics, we're either not going to have a lot of people left over if it becomes global thermonuclear war, or we're going to have people that are largely not going to flee the cities because it won't occur to them until it's too late. See, that if you're in a big city, most people delay. Well, let me see if I can think of a better way of explaining it. Remember during the 2004 tsunami down in Banda Aceh?
Yes.
The people just sat on the beach and went, "Oh, damn, look at that, dude.
Look at that wave."
Yeah, look at that wave coming at us. Wow, yeah, that's really taller than us. No kidding. And they got swallowed up, right? That's what's going to happen in the big cities.
Yeah.
There are people who are going to be watching, and look at Katrina and Rita. Look at the very base level of human behavior programming. People were in a position. People with any kind of brains at all could have got the hell out of Dodge. And what did? They stayed in town so they could steal jewelry, and they ended up getting shot by Blackwater or regular police or whoever.
Well, in their defense for a second, supposedly there were tons of buses that were ready to take and get a lot of these people out who didn't have transportation, and those buses failed to appear.
Oh, yeah. No question. There's a lot of dirty hands in that. There really are. I'm not excusing anybody's behavior on either side. All I'm saying is that in the event of social breakdown, or the breakdown of order, you will see a certain segment of society that has been programmed and doesn't give a damn about anybody, Mel, except themselves. And they're going to go to whatever value sets are programmed into them. And if that's an H3 and a 52-inch LCD TV and a couple of cases of 40s, and some crack, then that's what they're going to go for, and they're going to take it any way they can. The problem is not going to be sharing with the honest person who is willing to help out and pitch in order to feed the kids. It's going to be the crazy people, the valueless ones, the ones not steering by any moral compass except the me stuff. They're going to be a problem.
But in situations like that, I understand that we want to be able to help our fellow brothers
humans.
and sisters.
Yeah, of course.
We're all human. But if it comes to a point where the remaining portion of food can only be there to make you and your family survive, you have to put a limit in how much you can share.
No, you don't.
Explain.
Well, first of all, because nobody is in that situation right now this 5 minutes. There are so many great books on living off the land. It is, people have this highfalutin concept of, if it ain't a fresh pizza right out of the store or this, that, or the other thing, why? I'm starving to death. No, you just have to get a little creative. You have to go out and you have to actually look around, and you have to know what a sassafras tree looks like so you can make sassafras tea. You have to know how to boil water. You have time to buy a water filter. You have time to read a couple of books on survival. I mean, I've probably got every survival book ever written, for everything from the Ranger training book to Wilderness Escape and Evasion to the SAS Survival Guide. All of these things and Special Forces books, they all have these great guides on how to live off the land. Trappers coming to America didn't have 7-Elevens and didn't have Safeways and Kroger's and Meals Out and McDonald's. They went out and they actually had to kill things, trap things, fish a little bit, and live off the land. You can still do it.
Well, that was their way of life. I'm talking. By the way, when I was saying not sharing the last chunk of your meal, I meant to do it on a devil's advocate scenario. But what you're saying here, people who have never in their life go out hunting, or they live in a place like New York City, those people have no idea. Most of them, on how to do what you're saying.
Sure, and those people become professional victims.
Exactly.
And that's the whole point about my website is don't become a victim of the economy. Don't become a victim of right-left political thinking. Don't become a victim of insufficient knowledge. Because right now, I always walk around with three things in my pocket: a $20 bill, a very sharp, serrated edge, single-handed knife, and of striking steel. So I can always have fire. I can always make something out of locally available materials, no matter where I am with my knife. And if there's somebody around, I got $20 no matter how poor I am. And I just always walk around with $20 in my shoe. No, that's weird. No, it's not. Because if I got $20, I can at least, no matter what happens, wallet gets stolen, no sweat. I can call the bank. I can get back to my hotel. I've got cab fare in my shoe. How many people actually think this stuff through? And yet you read all the time about, people get their wallets stolen and suddenly they become total victims. They run up their credit cards to the max, yada, 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 and they don't know how to deal with the bank because they haven't done a trial run. They haven't talked to their bank. Gee, if I ever lost my credit cards, how would I deal with it? What's going to be my liability, my exposure? All of those kind of things. See, Mel, it's a preparedness is a mindset. And given a choice between going into a FEMA landing zone or going hungry, gee, I guess the FEMA landing zone is the best option there is, because once you're on your own in the streets of a big city, you're like prey. You're prey for gangs. You're prey for special enforcement units of police. You're prey for whoever out there in the way of folks that take advantage of the lower strata of society. So prison camp, are we all going to be victims? Don't have to be.
It's a matter of choice in a way.
It's always a matter of choice. I mean, that's always been the case. No matter where you look in history, you'll find most people have a choice. They don't give themselves the choice. They don't empower themselves to think around the obstacle. I mean, here we are. We've got 6 months left before this horrible thing happens in November. Between now and November, I'll be back up to hiking 10 to 15 miles a day. So I'm sitting here working out with a pack a little bit, trying to get my knees straightened out and stuff. And so I'm able to hop along and get a few things done around the ranch, and at the same time, walk the perimeter of the ranch and da-da-da-da-da. It's all just exercise, practice kind of stuff. And it's all good stuff to be doing. Most people do not walk a mile a day, Mel. I mean, how can you possibly think about surviving anything that, terrorists attack an American city? What are you going to do about it? Be a victim, or remember the basics of radiation. Walk into the wind, not away from the wind, or walk across the wind so you get out from under whatever's there, and then seek medical help and all the rest of it. But how many people even think about those kinds of basic responses? Almost none. They go home, they turn on the damn television set, and then they watch News Channel A, which has a hard-on for the White House, bad rap everything the president does, and then on the other side of it, you have the other network that's trying to cozy up to the White House, saying that it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. So, it's wildly entertaining, it's wildly amusing, but infinitely wasteful of your life.
And while we have internet, the most important commodity, in my opinion, is information.
Information, absolutely.
Right. And let's just talk for a moment about the domino effect of things as they unfold. I don't mean to keep picking on Florida, but it's just a big state, and I moved from there just like you moved from there too.
Yep.
Rental properties. People have rental properties or even live around the Gulf area. If they have to vacate or can't simply pay their mortgages, property taxes are not paid, not to mention sales tax revenue for all those cities in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas. Is this assurance that the U.S. dollar will finally die?
No. Not absolutely positive. What it will do probably is reduce the value of the dollar. But remember, we have Greece trying to fall apart. Spain will go next. Ireland will go after that. Portugal will go. And then we may see a breakaway currency because Germany's been hanging on to its gold. Why, they have good sense. And so, we may see a new currency, maybe involving Russia, Eastern Europe, and Germany, and maybe a few of the Scandinavian countries, which are kind of a natural currency block because they have a little bit more sense of productivity and decorum than some of the other places in Europe that take 8 weeks of vacation, and I get sick of people rubbing our nose in that, like, oh, how come you Americans can't take 8 weeks of vacation like the people in France or whatever? Like, look at the people in France and Spain and some of these places have in the way of national debt. Yeah, we're in bad shape, but so are they. We're in a crazy world, Mel, where the race is who can jigger up their dollars just so to hang on for another chapter of the game. It's crazy.
In a worst-case scenario, people don't think that if you have to leave, who's going to stay behind? Is the utility worker who deals with electricity, gas, or water? And how about the policeman who has a family and sees that the family may die? What's going to happen when all those have to vacate their positions? Who's going to provide those services?
That is the $64 trillion question. It depends how the breakdown occurs. If it goes with global thermonuclear war, That's going to be an ugly one, because the people that keep prisoners inside of prisons may not go to work, or they may go to work only long enough to take people into big cities and turn prison populations loose in big towns, so they don't come back to the suburbs or the rural areas where many prisons are. The utility workers, they're not going to show up if they're not getting paid, are they? I mean, that's a lesson we learned out of Russia. Did you ever read Cockburn and Cockburn's book, 1 Point Safe, about how there was a Russian weapons storage area with one soldier with a 45 guarding like all these nuclear warheads, and you know why? Nobody was getting paid, so they just said, screw it, walked off the job. And so that's the kind of thing that that's the reality of how these breakdown situations happen, and they happen with some regularity. I mean, there's a pattern to it. People who ain't getting paid ain't going to do much work, are they?
And a lot of people are concerned of Tampa, the city of Tampa, very concerned with the oil approaching because their water supply and electric grid use the water. Will power plant workers remain at their posts? And the answer, in my opinion, will be no.
Well, I think they will. Now that's kind of a funny little wave. As long as there is hope, they will remain at their post. And hope is kind of a nebulous thing. As long as there's hope, they'll get paid. As long as there's hope, they'll figure out some way around it. But it depends on the kind of water supply. Now, in the case of Tampa, I seem to recall it's a big reverse osmosis plant.
Right.
RO plants don't. I lived on a sailboat, had a water maker. Well, first thing that says on the water maker on the sailboat is, do not operate in port or in waters where there is any oil. Okay, well,
exactly.
If that's what the reverse osmosis filter notes said on my sailboat, then that kind of means that if I lived in Tampa, I'd want to have a couple of 55-gallon barrels from my local soda pop distributor that have been washed out, disinfected, put a shot or two of Clorox in it, fill it up with fresh water while you got it, because water can become very precious very quickly if desal plants go down, things like that.
Right.
So yeah, but I think that a lot of the workers will stay even when the plants go offline because of pollution, on the prospect that at some point they'll get a window and be able to bring those plants back online, even briefly, to resupply people's water. I think that's how it'll work out until there's such widespread evacuation from an area that there's no point in it, that everybody basically who's going to flee is going to flee, and that's that. And in that case, then you're reduced to blue plastic tarps playing catchment with the rain and then trying to filter out whatever crap is in the water from that.
And you can't even get it from the rain because there's right now all this methane. Many people think of the spill as only being oil, just asphalt, but there are billions of cubic feet of methane.
Yeah, methane's got some explosive hazard to it. Curiously enough, there's a hydrogen sulfide actually has been tested in some battlefield conditions, and it's poisonous stuff at high doses, but there is some scientific evidence that in some limited kinds of applications, hydrogen sulfide can actually extend people's lives. It does kind of a suspended animation type thing.
Is it reasonable then to assume that the cities around the Gulf will become ghost towns forever, or will we see them coming back in the future if this gets worse?
Oh, Mel, that's an ugly one. I think what will happen at some point is one of three things will happen. Either they'll become ghost towns and the government will basically clear the whole area and keep it cleared, or number two, the government will clear the area and then transient people, refugees from Cuba, Haiti, whatever, will move into the area and have a miserable life, and we'll end up with maybe as much as 20% of America turning into a third world crap hole. I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean that's just the way people operate. Given a choice between being in Florida and having a little bit of oil in your water, or being in Haiti and having no water at all, what's your choice for your family?
Of course.
And that's the reality of it. There are so many moving parts to it. All we can individually do is collect the skills and try to develop a sufficiently detached point of view so that we are able intellectually, emotionally, and from a skill set standpoint to deal with however horrific it has to be, however down and dirty to the ground, however living off the land it has to be. But you got time. I mean, you still have time to order a book from Amazon, read it, visit survival-oriented websites, get out and get some walking shoes while you can, get some friends up north, get on Facebook, find a job, build some doesn't mean they won't get it turned off. But if they don't get it turned off, then that's what's out there in the future. And then we have the problem of November anyway.
And we have hundreds of links in our forum that I posted last year, survival links that are buried somewhere. I'll find them. Anybody wants to go to our forum. Exactly. And we only have a few questions left. I know we're getting to the top of the hour. Can you stay for a few more minutes just to answer a few more questions?
Sure.
Excellent. Now, let's take a little detour. Let's move to another topic for a moment, possible war with Iran. We've been hearing this for a few years now, but the rhetoric seems to be more prevalent now than it ever was. Will the USA feel the effects of military consequences as a result of the Israeli-Iran war?
Yes, almost certainly. One of the problems that the Gulf of Mexico situation has created for the U.S. Is that, to a certain extent, the Gulf accident, if it was an accident, if it wasn't actually the first round in that Middle East war, for all we know, it may have actually some linkage there. It forces the U.S. into a more compliant posture because without energy coming in from the Gulf and new discoveries coming online, we're losing a tremendous window of development opportunity. And the rigs that are likely to be barred from further exploration, the Justice Department has made it very clear, no matter what the courts say, they're going to keep pressing until they get a moratorium on drilling. That's going to put those high-dollar rigs, the $10 million a day platforms, are going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to Nigeria. They're going to go to other parts of the world, Southeast Asia. That means that we'll have less energy wiggle room, and less energy wiggle room means what? Greater consequences in terms of U.S. susceptibility to things like an oil embargo to get back at us for supporting Israel in a first strike on Iran.
How come, and I find this peculiar, how come ever since the oil disaster, we haven't seen a spike in oil retail prices?
Part of that's supply. We have a much reduced demand picture on the one hand. Got a lot of unemployed people. People aren't taking the big vacations. Right. We have a slowed economy, down 7 or 11%, depending on if you're talking units or prices. The retail price of gasoline has started to come up somewhat. $75 a barrel ain't cheap exactly for gasoline. And remember, we're still in a deflationary environment, so the fact that oil has held its price around $70-75 actually means that oil is probably going up at 10% per year. What's failing is the rest of the economy.
And this is a question I've gotten from a few people, very interesting. If we vacate the Gulf area completely, can a foreign military force invade and occupy American soil when we are at our weakest point?
I'd have to get you Northcom's number, but I think about the time they got to Fort Benning, they'd get their butt kicked.
Right. That's
Fort Benning's in Georgia.
Exactly.
There's not a big defense force defending the Keys, and there may be a lot of people in islands and places like Costa Rica and some of Costa Rica's on the other side. There may be some of the countries bordering the Caribbean which feel they have some kind of right to the Gulf Coast states as payback for U.S. damage to their countries.
Now, this question, what is the National Dream Center Project, and what dream started this?
The National Dream Center. Favorite little pastime, Mel.
Yes.
Cliff has all of his predictions and so forth that fall out of automated reading of the whole internet and looking at how language shifts. All of the study I have done about prediction and trying to see the future ahead of time suggests that there is a window immediately before major events when a certain number of people tend to dream aspects or attributes of an event just before it shows up. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but on my website, on the I think it was April 19th or April 20th, the morning before the disaster down in the Gulf, I personally had a remarkably vivid dream about murder, a warehouse facility serving the petroleum industry, a location called The Wall, and an image of ships and oil offshore. And I wrote it up, and you can find it in the archives at urbansurvival.com. It was April 20th I wrote that, and it was called Irwin Allen's Dream. Now, 18 hours.
Irwin Allen as the movie producer.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Because when I have these, when I have vivid dreams, I mean, dude, it's like going to the theater. They're great. They're three-dimensional. Every tactile input is used. It's really remarkable. They're so fun. I mean, it's not fun to go see a grisly murder and somebody attacked with a knife who's a cook and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, but they're cool in the sense that you wake up and then 24 hours later it happens in the headlines or something approximating that, and you go, damn, that was special. So I thought, well, I've had several of these. I had a number of years ago, when I was living on my sailboat in Single up in the Pacific Northwest, I was up in Canada, north of Nanaimo, BC, which is up north of Vancouver some ways, and sailing up toward Desolation Sound and just kicking about. And I had this weird dream at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and my dream was my son, who's an EMT now, had been arrested and was wearing a King County jail jumpsuit. And I thought, well, this is pretty strange. So I got back into port, found a phone the next day, called down to Seattle, and talked to the family, and found out that my son, the night before, when I was having this dream, had been arrested for rappelling down the side of a 12-story hotel without bothering to get permission on a bed. And so he got arrested down at the bottom, and they said, you're not supposed to rappel down 12-story buildings in the downtown area at 4 o'clock in the morning without getting permission. and another one I had, I don't mean to bore you with these, but another one I had, same thing, off sailing up Desolation Sound or up in that area, and dream about my daughter Allison, and I dreamed of her wrapped in a green flag with a big black spot on it. Got back to, once again, port at Nanaimo, found a phone on shore, called down to talk to the family. Is Allison okay? Oh, thanks for calling. Gosh, we were trying to figure out how to get a hold of you. Allison went in the hospital last night about midnight and had an emergency appendectomy. And I'm going, oh, I get it. Yeah, green surgical sheet. Yeah, the blood on the sheet looks black. Okay, I'm down with that. So, how many times this has to happen to me before I go, oh, well, this is universe saying I should probably do something about National Dream Center. And occasionally I am shocked with some of the dreams because there's one, and I cannot identify this until at least September 15th because it may involve an emergent, this is weird, may involve an emerging national security situation, but I can say that a woman in Maryland and a man in Massachusetts, about 3 weeks apart, had a nearly identical dream. and it's one that is of concern to national security. And I have some friends who wear green and keep us safe at night so we can still have a country. And I passed it along to them when they said, okay, we'll just pass this up the line. This is kind of strange, all right. But essentially they had identical dreams about an event in August or early September. And
by the way, there's no censorship on this show. You can say whatever.
Yeah, but I don't want to simply because it would be inappropriate. If if it happens and makes headlines, I will. You can hand me on the show again. Yeah, you'll be the first guy outside of my website, and I'll publish both dreams without the names at that point, and say, see, this is how this got prevented. On the other hand, it may just be one of those quirky things that people simultaneously can occasionally have dreams, but both of these dreamers had unique content that is statistically improbable.
And they were reported by going to the nationaldreamcenter.org website?
Yeah, nationaldreamcenter.com. Yeah, and anybody can have a dream. I mean, if you have a dream that you really think has predictive value, just go register. It's free. Post the dream. We only censor dreams that are trying to sell religion or product or politics. We if you have a dream and you dreamed in your dream, whatever religious thing happened to you, or if you dream in your dream that everybody should buy XYZ product off this porn website, that ain't going to make it. And we do. My wife actually reads all the dreams every day, and although some days like today she gets a little behind and may
really
not read.
There are people who do that? There are people who submit dreams that are obviously a sales pitch?
Oh, hell yeah, dude.
Oh.
And that's in fact that's a whole big deal in SEO, search engine optimization. It's called linkbacks and pings, and there are spiders out there, that go out and seed the internet with links to XYZ website, and they charge you like $1,000 for 1,000 links, and somebody in India goes out and runs spiders against, all these blog posts where you're invited to comment. Dude, exactly. You didn't know that.
Yes. Now I remember all that. Jeez.
Yeah.
So they're doing that to the dreams.
Yeah, but it's all a scam.
This one, based on the impending economic collapse, is gold and or silver still a worth? By the way, these are all coming from around the world. Is gold and or silver still a worthy alternative currency to have on hand, or do you see even that changing in the coming months?
Gold and silver are always worth having, and diamonds are a girl's best friend. I think that's what my wife keeps telling me. I tell her, I'm saving my money to buy you a gold coin. The key thing here is gold and silver, very short term, may face downward pressure. As long as the U.S. is severely inflating its money supply, it means that the price of gold and silver will most assuredly go up over time. And then we put in the little asterisk, and I say, over time may not be immediate and may be more than 1 year, so it requires a certain amount of patience. I bought my gold coin. I only have one. In 2001, when I left San Francisco and started sailing about, and I paid $265 for it. And the last time I looked, it was worth $1,190 and change. So $1,195.80 roughly. And I think that's pretty good. It beat any other investment that I could have bought in 2001, except for a couple of get-lucky stocks, and the odds are always stacked against you on those things.
And I'm going to have to go rapid fire with the questions, because I'm going to just choose. Some people submitted several. I'm going to submit just one per person, only a few left. Will fresh water become more expensive than gold? Will it be main causes of wars in the future?
Eventually, it'll be the main causes of wars. It may or may not be more expensive than gold. Probably not. There's less gold and more water. As long as you can capture rain and as long as it doesn't have corexit and methane and all the other stuff.
Okay. Since in the past, the interpretations have sometimes confused actual events with discussions about possibility of events which gave rise to emotions. Earthquakes come to mind as an example. What is the possibility that the talk of Gulf evacuations will fulfill the predicted linguistics in lieu of actual evacuations? And same question relative to the disastrous poisoning of the air.
It's entirely possible, Mel, but unfortunately not likely, because you can think of this as a checksum. In programming terms, it's like add it all up and see if it still makes sense. The checksum is that in the linguistics, the quake, a quake about 19 months after April, so that'd be, let's see, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. So about November of 2011 is what eventually turns off the oil. And so could it just be headlines? Yeah. Could it? On some things, yes, that's true. We confuse headlines and media hype with actual events. No way around it. That's just how language works, because when it impacts people at an emotional level, we can't differentiate, just like your brain can't differentiate a true event from an imagined event sometimes. The same problem is true in linguistics.
Do you have any further broad details this far out of the tipping points the WebUp see in February through March 2011 and October through November 2011? Size, magnitude, etc.
If I'm around, I hope to be able to communicate those as we get further out there. We still have enough data that's untarnished by the deliberate sabotaging of Cliff's work that happened. That somehow got out in the wild on the net.
Yes.
We have enough data that's clean that we will be able to extract long-term values, and Cliff will probably publish that over the summer sometime, and then we'll have at least some clues as to what's out there. Is it worrisome? Oh yeah. Do I plan on living in a big city anytime soon? Oh no.
Sure.
I hate to sound flippant about it, but yeah, we live in perilous times, and hate to say, been talking about this stuff for years and years, but been talking about this stuff for years and years, and now it's here.
This is an important one for somebody who's presumed retired. Do you have any idea about the order of events and the breakdown of the social contract stuff, unemployment, Medicare, Social Security, for those dependent on government income? What should we watch for?
I don't think that one's easily predicted. I know Cliff hasn't gotten into any detail level of it. Neither have I, because I think it's going to be chaotic. I think some states will refuse social services before others. I think food supplies will falter depending on region. If you were in the Imperial Valley of California, that's only safe as long as it, that rise of land down by Mexicali continues above sea level, but that can change with a big earthquake. Food in the Rio Grande Valley seems very dependable, but all it takes is a good storm full of oil. I think that food supplies in the southeast look really good until oil-laced rain. I think it's all too chaotic, Mel, is what I'm saying, to forecast which part of the system hits the wall first.
Okay. This one, I'm trying to get a job in the healthcare industry, which forecasts to collapse at some point. Does healthcare system collapse before or with everything else?
I think it collapses with everything else, but I would encourage anybody to get as much healthcare training as they can, because healthcare as well as dental care will be in very high demand on the backside of things. And if you can do even rudimentary surgery for, remember, people used to die of appendectomies that didn't happen, and people died of, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
A funny noise on the phone.
I heard.
People tend to ignore that common diseases do kill people, and so the more healthcare training you have, something else you might want to, just as an investment thing, throw in your kit, maybe a course of Cipro and a couple of other broad-spectrum antibiotics like amoxicillin or a course of penicillin. You can get those from online pharmacies, get a prescription from overseas and get those shipped in. just something to have on hand, because it's terrible if you need it and don't have it. It's better to have it and be able to share it and not need it. But if a member of your team gets, or family, or however you want to organize yourself, is struck down by a simple ailment that's avoidable, that's something that shows a flaw in your planning.
And it's like an insurance policy. It's better to need it and have it and not need it, than need it and not have it.
Right.
Exactly. Or you can get MMS, folks. If you haven't heard what MMS is, go to our website. For $20 a year, you get a supply that addresses all sorts of disease.
Neat stuff, too. I'm a great believer
tried it?
in MMS. Oh, sure.
Oh, great. So you don't have to go anywhere. Just go to our website and check it out. It has been mentioned that a shortage of key commodity would be a temporal marker for the breakdown of the just-in-time distribution system. Has this occurred? And if not, when do you see this occurring?
Not sure when it's going to occur. We're seeing some of that in the long lead time commodities for purchases out of Asia, rice, wheat, and so forth. I don't think it's here yet. A lot of it will depend on what happens over the balance of summer with crops that are in the ground now.
And this is a great question. And it affects shows like mine, which is our internet and people around the world listen. Are there any preparations that we should be doing for the data gap time period?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there are. Number one, go to the internet, read up on what numeric IP addresses are, so that if DNS servers are shut down, you can get to Mel's website and Urban Survival by going to numbers instead of verbose English language names. That's number one. Number two, in the case of my peoplenomics.com subscribers, I will be putting together an effort here over the next, probably start in about 90 days, to collect people's physical addresses so the Peoplenomics newsletter can convert into an actual printed document. May only be 2 or 3 pages folded up manually and mailed out, but at least I will be able to keep those lines of communications going as long as the mail service is still in operation, provided I get myself a printer that'll handle that kind of volume and so forth. But yeah, I think there's, online banking sounds like a great thing, but I would get 2 to 3 months of cash on hand. I would also strongly recommend not telling anybody you have 2 or 3 months of cash on hand.
Right.
Or in my case, 2 or 3 months of cash on hand is a $100 bill. You reduce your operating costs and you don't need much money, right? But remember that if your insurance, if your pension, if your banking is all internet-based and the internet goes down, you ain't got much in the way of money.
And by the way, you mentioned the U.S. Postal Service, which is bankrupt already. What happens if all these massive evacuations take place? What happens to the Postal Service?
I think it evacuates with everybody else. It falls back to safe operating positions. I also expect that before this time of year from now, we'll be down to 5-day-a-week delivery of post office, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think the post office, frankly, is still one of the biggest bargains out there. If you can, send an ounce of virtually any place for 44 cents starting next year, or 46 cents starting in January, I think a person would be a damn fool not to buy forever postage right now.
Well, they just need to stop paying $125,000 bonuses to their managers. Maybe things can turn around a little bit, right?
Oh yeah, well it's always the guys that do the sorting and walking that make the mail get through. Right. I've been a long time since I've had a bonus anywhere near that.
Right. What is your best guess on when the floor falls out and the ability to buy prep materials will be gone?
August 15 to October 1st, kind of a bell curve in there someplace. I think that the ability to buy survival goods is still very good now. You can pick up good water filters and so forth relatively easily. You can get MREs right now fairly inexpensively. Even Amazon and places like that have them. BePrepared.com, if you go to BePrepared/Urban Survival, you can find deals on long-term stored foods, grains, things like that. And right now, I don't see any problem for the next 30 to 60 days, but the caveat is we have this terrible astronomical alignment that comes up here shortly toward the end of the month. I was talking to Arch Crawford, who writes an Astro Money publication called The Crawford Perspectives. And we have this ugly astronomical thing coming up later in the month, July 30th into August 1st, 2nd, where, according to Arch, it's the worst he's ever seen in the stars in his life. And so if we get into some really horrific developments in that period of time, then the answer to the question may be, gee, Mel, that was August 3rd, that stuff got to be too late.
And July the 11th, the solar eclipse, do you see anything?
I think we might see the beginning of a real serious downturn in the market on the 12th. Just for a number of reasons, I'm probably pushing in 100% on the short side at what I hope will be the session highs tomorrow for the $3 that I have in paper assets.
So the high session tomorrow, Friday, meaning July the 12th, which is Monday.
Yeah, I think things will turn down next week. And how far down they go wouldn't surprise me to see by first week of August the Dow going down as low as maybe 8,300, 8,500. Make a short bounce up into September, maybe get back up to the kind of levels we're at right now. And then come November, when everything hits the fan, Dow 6,600, or by the end of the year, maybe as low as 4,400 or lower.
So don't take for granted any more 10,000 points in the Dow.
No, I think at some point, and whether it's going to be driven by earnings or whether it's bad news from BP or whether it's Hillary Clinton putting her foot in her mouth and telling Russia to get out of, it's telling Russia to get out of some of the places like Abkhazia and so forth. That'd be like telling the U.S. to get out of Costa Rica. I mean, it's weird.
What is that? Please, for those who are listening, explain. Costa Rica does not have a military, folks, and there was an agreement, I believe, with the United States where we were going to protect them in case. What happened there recently?
Basically, the U.S. Militarily used the drug war, which has always been there, and used it as an excuse to essentially set up a military presence, if we feel like it, in Costa Rica.
Incredible.
Yeah, I mean it's making a lot of splash in the South American press. I've been reading translated stuff, and it's very ominous that maybe there are some drug transshipment points and so forth, but there's drug transshipment points every place.
Exactly. Now, will air travel be, just a couple more questions, will air travel be restricted as the tipping point nears? And if yes, what's the last week to get out of the USA safely, and where are the safest areas in the world?
Got a couple of readers who have selected New Zealand. A couple of other readers have selected the highlands of Ecuador. A couple of other readers have selected Paraguay and southern Argentina. A couple of other readers have selected South Africa. What do these mostly have in common besides being south of the equator? If we don't get a nice global financial collapse in November, that means almost by default that the only other thing likely is either war from space with aliens, or we get something really horrific like global thermonuclear war, in which case you want to be well south of the equator because there's not as much wind mixing. You want to be south of the southern intertropical convergence. So.
And have you made contacts to ensure that you will be able to continue reaching the public with your updated information up until the tipping point?
Oh yeah. I mean, we've got urban survival intends to continue doing what it does. We've got 3 on-ramps to the internet here at the ranch. We've got satellite access. We've got private high-speed microwave right into to fiber, and then we've got dial-up, as actually 2 dial-up lines too. So we can keep going, and my servers are located not in Texas. The actual content servers are located in a northern Midwestern state well above 40 degrees. And I'm looking for an airplane, so if I go buy a silly airplane, I'll be able to leap Elaine and I 600, 700 miles north in no more than 3 or 4 hours.
Tell us when you get the airplane, will you?
Oh yeah, I'm debating. It looks like a Cherokee 140/160 is probably as cheap as I can find. That'll carry 4 people and modest fuel, or 3 people and some get out of Dodge stuff.
And last question: any comments on taxes, and will there be anyone to collect mortgage payments, utilities, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, up until we actually see what the tipping points are, I'm planning to pay all of my taxes, and I still pay my quarterly due to IRS, and I have no intention on backing away from that. Nor would I recommend anybody else back away from it, because ultimately the government is our partner, and if you don't like it, then call your congressman, and if you do like it, at least acknowledge that it does provide a function. And I think anybody who doesn't pay their fair share of taxes, and I pay 30% of what I make to the government, I don't begrudge them that at all. I think America is the best country out there. I think we're in a very difficult time. I think we each have an individual responsibility to be prepared and to think one step faster than bureaucracy. Even though payments to the IRS go to pay interest on the foreign debt, it's our responsibility, right? Yeah, I understand that, Mel, but at some point it's like paying protection money if you run a restaurant in New York. Let's not call them mafia, but I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I mean, you got to play the game. I got other battles to fight. I'm trying to provide information services. At some point, if IRS goes away because, we're at the end of the financial world, then I guess I won't be paying them. But I'll also be down to eating snakes, and I won't have interstate freeways to be traveling. And some people would say good riddance to that. George, give us some concluding remarks, please. Closing remarks: buy low, sell high, or or sell high and buy low. Once again, how do we get in touch with your work? urbansurvival.com or peoplenomics.com. There's also an active mirror of the urban survival content at independencejournal.com, which is, think of that as my website fallout shelter. And George, even if it's for the best or the worst in the future, we'd like to bring you back, just like it would bring Cliff back every so often to give us some updates, because what you research is very important to everybody who listens to us. And I appreciate it, Mel. I think you're a stand-up guy, and your questions are really very well formed and thought out. The most important thing, as I say, anybody can do right now is use the available time you have to get as much knowledge as you can, because ultimately, if something hits the fan, you got your 2 feet and what's between your ears to get you by. Great. George, thank you so much for your participation. We'll talk to you soon. Okay, Mel. Hey, thank you, man. I enjoyed it. Excellent. Me too. Take care. You bet. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. And that was George Ure. No wonder Cliff and George work so well together. It's pure synergy. I can tell George will be back with us in the near future. As often as we have Cliff on the show, they both can help us connect more dots. And believe me when I tell you that some of the topics discussed tonight, although there was a bit of humor involved, they're rather difficult for me to cover. The states surrounding the Gulf area are very dear to my heart, and I will do everything to keep you informed as best as I can and as long as I can. To try to get information from the mainstream media is rather futile. When you see Dr. Sanjay Gupta from CNN interview a BP medical doctor talk about the health hazards, you know that information will be biased. Not to mention the freedom of the press is currently almost null and void in the affected areas. And next week's special guest, if things remain the same and nothing drastic happens on July the 11th, as many predict, our special guest will be Antonio Huneeus, the Vatican ET connection. And remember that the 8GB metal-cased USB drive is now available and full with all of Season 1
and lots of bonus information. Visit the Veritas store to purchase. And I'll leave you with a quote from Martin Luther King. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expedience asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when a man must take a position that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but one must take it because it is right. Thanks for listening. I'm Mel Fabregas. Until next week, be well, and remember, be skeptical, but don't close your mind.